Make France great again. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 101, Public-Private Partnership Railway Policy. Next, we will quietly wait for the fight between Prime Minister Barrow and the Constituent Assembly, which must be very exciting. In his heart, he wished that the Party of Order and the Mountain Party of the Republican Party would fight against each other. Jerome Bonaparte showed a schadenfreude expression. If the two tigers fought each other, they would die. As long as the sick tiger of the Party of Order drove away the two parties, the Republican Party and the Mountain Party. A little tiger, Jerome Bonaparte turned into a tiger hero to end the diseased tiger of the Party of Order. When the time comes to tear off some meat from the Party of Order and some of the Republicans to feed it to the baby tiger of Bonaparte, Bonaparte will thrive and become a sharp blade in his hands. After watching the show, Jerome Bonaparte has not forgotten the series of problems he will face in the future. The coup d'etat does not mean the point, but a new starting point. Now he has to make some preparations for this new starting point, such as, Jerome Bonaparte turned his gaze to Marley and said, "Mr. Marley, what do you think about the railroad?" Marley was stunned for the first time at Jerome Bonaparte's sudden inquiry, and after waiting for a long time, he responded step by step, "I think the railway is a huge project that requires a lot of investment. Only funds can be built. The maintenance cost after construction will be astronomical." Marley talked incessantly about his passive view of railways, and a hint of disappointment flashed in Jerome Bonaparte's eyes. Of course, Jerome Bonaparte does not intend to criticize Marley's passive railway policy. From the experience of later railways have no intention of promoting the formation of a favorable cycle between the villages and cities in various regions of France. That is to say, to expand the internal circulation of France. You must know that France in the 19th century was still a closed environment of urban and rural duality. Industrial products in the cities could not be transported to the countryside for farmers in the countryside, and the farmers in the countryside were also unable to transport food to the big cities. Regional food prices have had wildly different effects. Especially in 1847, there was a serious shortage of bread in Paris, but flour in areas far from the Seine remained below the French price level. Guizot, who could not allocate a large amount of flour from other provinces to Paris, could only try to buy the Tsar's bread. The high tariffs on the bread hurt the workers in Paris, which led to the February Revolution. If you put aside the railway experience of later generations and focus on the present, Marley's passive railway policy is not difficult to understand. The speculative movement that began in Britain in 1845 infected the entire European continent like a plague. The stock exchanges in London, Paris, Frankfurt, and Brussels saw new highs for railway claims. As soon as the main lines were planned, they were put into the exchanges as stocks. In 1847, the Irish potato crisis broke out, and it became the fuse that detonated the railroad bubble. Iron-related bonds. It fell about 40% overnight, and the Great Western Bank, which holds the most railroad claims, is almost in danger of bankruptcy. The explosion of the British railway bubble was like the collapse of the first card of the domino. The Prussian, Austrian, and French railway companies also went bankrupt one after another, and many planned routes were also forced to stop. If it weren't for the habit of good government in France since ancient times, the entire French railway company would have been crying all over the place. The railway company, which barely survived, was facing the crisis of nationalization last year. If the June Revolution had not erupted suddenly, the railway company might have needed the government to continue to look after it. Based on the pessimistic outlook of the entire railway industry, Marley's negative remarks are not difficult to understand. Understanding is understanding. Jerome Bonaparte still has to continue to implement the content of his plan. After Marley had racked his brains to repeat all the negative railway policies he knew, Jerome Bonaparte said, "Mr. Marley, what you just said was all based on economics. From an economic point of view, building a railway is really a thankless thing. What if we look at it from a political science point of view?" From a political point of view? Marley's eyes widened. He didn't seem to understand what Jerome Bonaparte meant. Let's tell you that. Jerome Bonaparte took out a green crystal dipped pen on the peachwood table and drew a coordinate system on the paper. The x-axis marked stability and the y-axis marked employment. The rate, starting from 0, draws a 45-degree slash. The stability of Paris depends on its employment rate. Our government has just experienced 2 civil wars and is in an extremely unstable phase. If you want to make Paris stable, Riyadh1.com, we must let the workers in Paris have something to do. The railway is precisely a project that can not only increase the employment rate, promote the cooperation of the upstream and downstream industrial chains, but also be profitable. But Morny still had concerns, and the crisis of 1947 made Morny linger in fear. Jerome Bonaparte saw Morny's concerns. He patted Morny's shoulder and said, "The British incident, in the final analysis, is just because all the companies entered the railway in a rush, and then planned randomly, caused by the route. As long as we can standardize the route of the railway, careful screening of every company can completely eliminate these difficulties. Don't forget, our public works department also has a secret army." Morny suddenly remembered that the Ministry of Public Works also has a road and bridge unit known as the Emperor of Railway Earth. These national engineers, who are mainly responsible for railway approvals, are not only excellent railway planners, but also an interest group that dares to fight. From the first day of the French railway in 1823, the road and bridge troops have been **** fought at with the privately operated companies on the nationalization of the French railway point. Although they were defeated in 1845, their power suffered no loss. We can design a railway committee in the Ministry of Public Works, delineate some qualified companies to issue shares, and negotiate with the finance department on the issue of railway transportation prices. Jerome Bonaparte described the French railway in 40 years. The plan class came out. We can also announce to the public that all railways are in the form of public-private partnerships. In this case, the hearts of the citizens are also guaranteed. Chapter 102. Everyone loves to build railways. Morny was extremely excited when he listened to Jerome Bonaparte's drawing of the railway blueprint for him. Of course, he was not excited by the railway itself, but by the rolling interest behind the railway. Not to mention anything else, just to define some qualified companies. What kind of companies are qualified to issue stock and debt? The twists and turns in this can be said for many days. Not to mention that the guidance and procurement of the road and bridge troops to private companies is not a small amount, and there are also many ways to deal with safety performance issues. Morny, who was in the same boat, immediately thought of the follow-up, and he blurted out, "Follow-up public maintenance is also a lot of expenses, and the Ministry of Public Works is obliged to inject funds for the follow-up public maintenance." "That's right." Looking at Morny, who was gradually on the right track, Jerome Bonaparte nodded with satisfaction. The Railway Commission can issue creditors' rights at the right time to serve as public funds maintenance, which is very important for a financially stable country. For example, a little debt problem is more conducive to the operation of the government. Jerome Bonaparte gave an example. "I once heard a joke that if you owe the bank 1,000 francs, the bank will force you to pay it back. If you owe the bank 10 million francs, the bank will treat you as the same as the uncle." That's right. The huge interests have made Morny completely forget the negative railway remarks he just made. He just wants to quickly establish a railway committee and then make some contributions to the country as much as possible. "Mr. Morny, I hope you can write a report on the proposal for the formation of the railway committee and send it to Prime Minister Barrot." Jerome Bonaparte nodded in satisfaction. He retracted his hand on the table, shrank his upper body back, took a relaxed posture, and then raised his hand to press on his temples to relieve mental pressure. Will Barrot really approve this plan? Now he is worried about France's finances. Morny frowned. He was a little uncertain about Barrot's attitude. Politics is politics, and business is business. Jerome Bonaparte said to Morny in a peculiar tone. "Besides, building railways is politically correct. We are here for the stability of France. Meek people become thugs in the face of unemployment. That's right. It's all for France." Morny responded impassively. At this moment, he seemed to have become a noble person, a person who asked for the life of the people, and a person who gave up his life. If you look closely, you will find the greed in Morny's eyes. How can a guy who is full of greed become a truly noble person? Okay. It's time for me to get off work. You can discuss the relevant legal provisions with our Minister Rowett. We must avoid the unfavorable provisions as much as possible. Jerome Bonaparte got up and stretched out. He turned his body and waved his hand to indicate that Morny and Eugen Rowett left. Rowett and Morny, who were holding top hats, looked at each other, got up and bowed to Jerome Bonaparte, then turned and left together. When the two were about to leave, Jerome Bonaparte suddenly shouted, "Wait a minute." Eugen Rowett and Morny turned to look at Jerome Bonaparte. Eugen Rowett said, "Your Majesty, what other orders do you have? After the Railway Commission's plan is finalized, don't hand it over to Prime Minister Barrow. Prime Minister Barrow is now preparing for the restoration of the salt tax." Jerome Bonaparte responded to the two. Yes. The two left the study at the Élysée Palace, and there was only Jerome Bonaparte alone in the study. It was already 3:40 in the afternoon, and it was already dusk outside the window. Lingley's cold wind mercilessly beat the glass windows of the Élysée Palace, making a crackling sound. A few snowflakes fell from the clouds to the ground of Paris. The real winter is coming at this moment. After a while, night fell quietly, and as the night fell, the snow became heavier and heavier, and the snow particles turned into snowflakes, and fell all over the sky, gently falling on the roof of the Élysée Palace like a goose feather, and sticking to the study on the glass window. Carrying a kerosene lamp, Persigny cautiously opened the door of the study. The faint kerosene lamp recalled the wandering Jerome Bonaparte. "Your Majesty, it's snowing." Persigny, who placed the kerosene lamp beside the desk, reminded in a low voice, "Huh?" Jerome Bonaparte turned to glance at the window lattice behind him, and nodded. "Yes. It's snowing." The snow fell on and off for several days, and the whole of Paris was shrouded in white. Wealthy families put on heavy padded clothes and talk about the past and the present around the charcoal burning fireplace point. The poor people cuddle together and use each other's body heat to warm each other point. Although Paris was exceptionally cold this year, the atmosphere in the National Assembly Hall at the Palais Bourbon was exceptionally anxious. Riyadh1.com since January 15th. Prime Minister Barrow submitted to the National Assembly about following the proposal to restore the salt tax. There was not a day in the following days that the National Assembly did not close in a rowdy environment. Even though Marist, the Speaker, has repeatedly stressed that the National Assembly should remain silent, no political party is willing to follow his arrangement. For the Republicans, Prime Minister Barrow, who took the restoration of the salt tax as the first step in the administration of the cabinet, is simply a good target. They, who occupy a certain proportion in the National Assembly, can use this opportunity to unite to achieve two birds with one stone. Both can take this opportunity to overthrow the cabinet, and can use it to play the role of protecting the interests of the peasants, to attack the person chosen by the peasants. Referring to President Jerome Bonaparte, the restoration of the salt tax was unsurprisingly rejected by the Republicans and the Mountain Party in the National Assembly. At the same time, the Republicans in the National Assembly and the members of the Montana Constituent Committee cast a no confidence against Barrow in a silent manner, and the Party of Order, which has not yet held a majority in the National Assembly, was also unable to help Odilon Barrow. Constitutional Committee. After the June Revolution, a small number of members of the National Assembly were elected to the organization that wrote the Constitution, and most of them were members of the Republican faction. If Barrow does not fight back, he will be ousted by the National Assembly from the position of Prime Minister he has just held for less than a month. January 15th, 1849. Unable to bear, Barrow went to the Élysée Palace, and, under the leadership of Persigny, found Jerome Bonaparte, who was listening to the veterans telling the story of the Emperor and Empress Joseph at Fort Malmaison, and said murderously, "Mr. President, I request ban the club, suspend the functions of the city government, and disband the Rangers." Chapter 103, Emperor and Emperor. Facing Odilon Barrow's gesture of giving orders to Jerome Bonaparte in an almost commanding tone, Jerome Bonaparte did not have a trace of anger in his heart. On the contrary, there was a trace of joy. The struggle between Odilon Barrow and the National Assembly was part of Jerome Bonaparte's plan. The current situation is obviously that Odilon Barrow is in a disadvantageous position. Otherwise, he would not have hurriedly seek his help. Furthermore, even if Jerome Bonaparte didn't have any attitude, the veteran standing beside him obviously couldn't bear the humiliation of Barrow to the emperor's nephew. He looked at Odilon Barrow. The blue flat top hat he should have been wearing on his head was thrown at Odilon Barrow's feet, and he shouted sharply, "Mr. Barrow, stand in front of you. It's the emperor's nephew." Immediately, the veteran stooped slightly upright, and with a solemn expression, Jerome Bonaparte pleaded for orders. "Your Majesty, please allow me to have a duel with Mr. Barrow. I will never allow him to treat you with such an attitude." Odilon Barrow, who was still aggressive just now, was instantly frightened by the veteran's sudden duel, so that he didn't know how to respond for a while. He had to turn his attention to Jerome Bonaparte, hoping that he could help him clear the siege. Seeing that the dignified prime minister was forced by a veteran not to come to the stage, Jerome Bonaparte could not wait to applaud the veteran. After all, Jerome Bonaparte still helped Odilon Barrow to clear the siege. He bent down and picked up the flat-topped cap that the veteran had dropped on the ground, and by the way, patted the dust on the general's hat and handed it to the veteran. Said, "Soldier, I'm happy for your loyalty, but the military cap is a symbol of the soldier, and it cannot be thrown on the ground at will. The military cap of the Bourbon dynasty is only worthy of being thrown on the ground." The veteran said contemptuously, and then turned into a pleading attitude. "His Royal Highness, since the empire left us, this unfortunate country has experienced two unfortunate dynasty. They are literally trampling on the glory of this country, and only by re-establishing an empire can we get out of our current predicament and regain our honor." The veteran's heartfelt plea made Jerome Bonaparte think for a while that the guy in front of him was someone from Persigny. Looking at the sincere eyes of the veteran, Jerome Bonaparte ruled out this possibility. Jerome Bonaparte, whose time had not come, could only respond vaguely, "The times are changing. We should not follow the rules. As long as I can serve France, I will be satisfied." A trace of loneliness flashed in the veteran's eyes. He recalled the days when he fought with the emperor, and his upright body seemed to have been drained of all energy and stooped again. Of course, if the citizens of France can support us as they did at the beginning, then the rebuilding of the empire is impossible. Jerome Bonaparte tried to console the veterans. "I believe the empire will be rebuilt." The old soldier straightened up again and responded with a loud voice. Standing aside, Odilon Barrow listened to Jerome Bonaparte's conversation with the veteran. He didn't know whether His Excellency the President really wanted to rebuild the empire or comfort the veteran. However, these have nothing to do with him. Odilon Barrow, who has been in politics for more than 10 years in the July dynasty, disagrees, nor does he oppose the establishment of an empire, as long as the president can persuade others. However, Barrow is convinced that the chances of Mr. President persuading others to agree to the establishment of an empire are almost zero. "His Royal Highness, let me show you the office of His Majesty the Emperor," the veteran said enthusiastically to Jerome Bonaparte. "Mr. Prime Minister, why don't we talk about it after the visit? There is a lot of time anyway," Jerome Bonaparte suggested to Odilon Barrow. Odilon Barrow, who could not stand against Jerome Bonaparte, followed Jerome Bonaparte to the office of the chief executive. A glass chandelier hangs from the ceiling of the office. Just below the chandelier is a walnut desk. On the desk is a pen holder made of nanmu and a book with a yellowed skin. Several goose feather dipped pens are inserted into the pen holder. Opposite the desk is a bookshelf made of round patterned mahogany. The bookshelves are close to the wall. The bookshelves are also full of books. The whole office looks spotless and looks like new. "It seems that you clean this place often," said Jerome Bonaparte to the veteran. "That's right. I personally clean the Emperor's office regularly." The veteran looked at the desk with pious eyes and said with a hint of fanaticism in his tone, "Yeah, you've worked hard." Jerome Bonaparte nodded and walked to the desk in 3 steps. The book on the desk is The Gallic Wars, which was Emperor Napoleon's favorite book back then. Everything is organized according to Her Majesty Queen Josephine. Her Majesty the Queen said back then that it should be like, said, the veteran's voice was a little choked, "It should be like when Her Majesty the Emperor was there." Riyadh1.com His Majesty the Emperor has promised he will come back sooner or later. Jerome Bonaparte was silent for a long time. He said with a smile, "The Emperor is not here. The Emperor's nephew is here." Having said that, Jerome Bonaparte sat on the chair that his uncle Napoleon made. "It's good to come. It's good to come," the veteran muttered, his face full of relief. Cough, cough. Jerome Bonaparte, who was sitting on the chair, cleared his throat and gestured to Pessinny with his eyes. Pessinny, who received the signal from Jerome Bonaparte, took the old man out of the office and closed the door of the office intimately. "Let's do it, Mr. Prime Minister." Jerome Bonaparte stretched out his hand to signal Odilon Barrot to sit down. Point perhaps because of psychological hints, Odilon Barrot seemed to see the emperor again. He should have been a competitor to discuss with Jerome Bonaparte, but he actually felt lower. Point Odilon Barrot, who was sitting opposite Jerome Bonaparte, clenched his fists on his thighs, as if waiting for Jerome Bonaparte's words. "Okay, Mr. Barrot, let's talk about your request." Jerome Bonaparte leaned against the back of the chair, raised his head slightly, and clasped his hands on his right leg. "Mr. President, I think we should act. Just teach those guys a lesson. They have seriously interfered with the established policy after the cabinet." Odilon Barrot's tone was not as aggressive as he was just now, and he turned to a pleading attitude. "We? Do you mean you and me, or the party of order and me?" said Jerome Bonaparte lazily. "Of course." Barrot paused. Chapter 104, Army Admission. "What's the matter? Mr. Barrot, you haven't answered my question." Jerome Bonaparte still questioned Odilon Barrot without knowing it. "We will all support your decision, President." Odilon Barrot tried to deal with Jerome Bonaparte in a vague manner. "Mr. Barrot, you are fighting against the National Assembly." Jerome Bonaparte directly pierced Odilon Barrot. He spread his hands and said helplessly, "I cannot fight with the National Assembly. To fight, the Constitution does not give me such power. Mr. President, I didn't ask you to fight the National Assembly. I just implore you to order the banning of the club and the dissolution of the Rangers. This is your constitutional right." Odilon Barrot once again described his next actions as conforming to the Constitution thing. "Excuse my refusal, Mr. Prime Minister. Doing this will not do me any good, and it will also tear France into a tear." Jerome Bonaparte, who did not see the rabbit, but not the eagle, was unwilling to do so without absolute interests. Barrot endorsed it, and he picked up the Gallic War Chronicles on the desk and read it. The National Assembly's no confidence motion made Odilon Barrot feel on pins and needles. Now he has obviously lost the stability he had before becoming Prime Minister. Beneath Tom Bonaparte. "Mr. President, what are your conditions?" Odilon Barrot asked dryly with a bitter smile. Jerome Bonaparte turned his attention from the Gallic War to Odilon Barrot, and when he put the book back on the table, he replied to Odilon Barrot, "Mr. Barrot, when I was very young, my father told me that everything in the world is priced from the beginning. I have a suggestion. I don't know if you want to listen to it. Did you finally start negotiating conditions?" Odilon Barrot responded immediately, "I'd love to listen." "Well, you can think of it as a business or a policy. The executors of the policy are of course you and me," the misnomer Jerome Bonaparte added, "and of course you regardless of the party we belong to. We can all make a lot of money in this area, and we don't have to worry about people gossiping afterwards." Immediately afterwards, Jerome Bonaparte told Odilon Barrot about the Railroad Commission and the issuance of public creditors' rights. Barrot also raised the same questions as Morny raised at the beginning, and Jerome Bonaparte also answered them one by one. Reasonable design. Odilon Barrot couldn't help but said, "This can avoid disorderly and savage growth, and also avoid the issue of approval by the National Assembly. So, Mr. Prime Minister, we are heroes, and see the same thing." From Odilon Barrot's expression, it can be concluded that Odilon Barrot already agrees with this plan. I want to ask, who made this plan? Odilon Barrot is eager to know who proposed the plan. No one knows how to operate better than the proposer of the plan. Jerome Bonaparte, who was unwilling to act as an early bird, resolutely gave Morn all the credit. "This is the plan given to me by the Minister of Public Works, Mr. Morn. Mr. President, is there any more detailed and specific content for this plan?" Odilon Barrot gestured with his hands. "It would be great if the plan could be sorted out." "Of course." Jerome Bonaparte tapped the desk twice. Pessinny outside the door quickly entered the office after hearing the movement. "Pessinny, I have to trouble you." Jerome Bonaparte said to Pesani point afterwards. Jerome Bonaparte ordered Pesani to bring over the plan submitted by Morny in the drawer of the study at the Elysee Palace point. After receiving the order, Pesani acted quickly, and Jerome Bonaparte and Odilon Barrett discussed the issue of the National Assembly again. "Mr. Prime Minister, I have a question for you," said Jerome Bonaparte, putting his hands on the desk. "I remember that Minister Leon Fauch told me as early as January 6th. Regarding the necessity of disbanding the Rangers. I have also unified his opinion why the Rangers have not been disbanded yet." Barrow explained to Jerome Bonaparte about the Rangers. Since the cabinet meeting on January 6th, Leon Fauch ordered the disbanding of the Rangers, but the Rangers refused to disband on the grounds that Leon Fauch was not their direct commander. The Rangers, led by the Ministry of the Interior, but with military salaries, were not at all threatened by Leon Fauci, and with the secret support of the Republican faction, the Rangers even dared to have a small-scale conflict with the Capital Corps. Damn, how did Paris become like this? Neither the Republicans nor the mountains are clean. Jerome Bonaparte cursed. That's right. The Republicans and the Mountain Party is not the stuff to govern the country at all. They will only bring down the whole country. Odilon Barrow, who was equally displeased with the Republicans and the Mountain Party, echoed, "In this Kasua.Riyadh1.com Mr. Prime Minister, I think they should be given a little color. I think Paris should hold a military parade in the near future to prevent the revolution from coming back." Jerome Bonaparte urged Odilon Barrow conducts a preventive coup point for Jerome Bonaparte's instigation. Odilon Barrow was obviously a little moved. At this time, he didn't even think about using the army to force the parliament to submit, whether he and his party would one day become victims of the army. "I still have to discuss this with General Changanier," Odilon Barrow responded. "I want to discuss it with General Changanier. Otherwise, it will be difficult to properly resolve the issue of the Rangers." Jerome Bonaparte nodded in response. As soon as Jerome Bonaparte finished speaking, Pesani appeared in the office with a document in hand. Pesani respectfully handed the information to Jerome Bonaparte, who in turn handed it over to Odilon Barrow. Barrow, who received the information, flipped through the content page by page until the end of the last page. Faced with a well-prepared plan, Odilon Barrow couldn't help but disagree. "I agree with Mr. Morny's plan. After the cooperation between the two parties is reached, what remains is how Odilon Barrow does the work of Changanier." Jerome Bonaparte, returning to the Elysee Palace, rarely saw Odilon Barrett for the next few days. However, with the support of Odilon Barrow, the Railroad Commission began to be established in an orderly manner. It was not until the end of the cabinet meeting on January 25th that Odilon Barrett approached Jerome Bonaparte. "Mr. President, General Changanier and Minister Lelia have agreed that the army will be held on January 29th. A military parade." Chapter 105. Military Parade Smoke Bomb. "Really? That's great." Jerome Bonaparte pretended to be very happy. He clenched his fists, as if he was grabbing something. "We can finally teach those rhetoric members a lesson." "That's right." A smile appeared on Odilon Barrow's slightly haggard face, and the depression in his chest disappeared without a trace due to the upcoming military parade. He used a slightly hoarse voice to be firm. Unswervingly said, "The Constituent Assembly has completed its task, and it should be dissolved, and a new Legislative Assembly will be re-elected." Recently, the continuous offensive from the National Assembly has caused Odilon Barrow to have a splitting headache. Now, he was finally able to let go of the army's impending removal of some of the instability in the National Assembly. Then, "Mr. Barrow, I'm looking forward to the military parade going on as scheduled." Jerome Bonaparte, who was eager for Odilon Barrow to make the news bigger to make him, and the party of order behind him a target of public criticism, encouraged Odilon Barrow. "It's better to let the guys in the National Assembly see our determination. The rats who disturb the peace of Paris must get out of the parliament." Jerome Bonaparte's encouragement made Odilon Barrow feel that the advantage is mine. He hesitated for a moment and then said, "How about we reveal some details of the military parade to the Paris newspapers in advance? It can make those guys in the council dare not act rashly." "Mr. Prime Minister, you are welcome." Jerome Bonaparte put on a gesture of inaction. "I will fully cooperate with your work." Odilon Barrow raised his head and left the Elysee Palace. Now he is like a gladiator who defeated all powerful enemies in the arena. Jerome Bonaparte, who was clinging to the back of the chair, quietly watched Odilon Barrow's leaving figure, murmured at the corners of his mouth, "Mantis catches cicadas, Aureola's behind." Then, Jerome Bonaparte called the Secretary General Pessigny to hand over a note to Pessigny. "Tell Le Bonaparte that President Jerome Bonaparte will review the French troops." Pessigny, who took the note, nodded to show his understanding. "Your Majesty, is the publication date of the newspaper set for tomorrow? Go and get in touch with the Gazette, and try to publish it tomorrow or the day after." Jerome Bonaparte responded again. Jerome Bonaparte believes that the Gazette, the throat of the Party of Order, will not miss this golden opportunity. "Yes." Pessigny, who received the order, replied respectfully. "By the way, what is the size of the Bonaparte now?" Jerome Bonaparte, who has been a hand-luck shopkeeper for a long time, is concerned about his own industry. Since His Majesty became the president, the scale of the newspaper has been booming. Many newspapers want to cooperate with us. We have also merged with many newspapers that are on the verge of bankruptcy, and now they can be regarded as small and large in Paris," said. When Pessigny reached the scale of the Bonaparte, he smiled instantly, and it was a satisfying feeling to be able to see the newspaper office that he ran by himself. "Yeah." Jerome Bonaparte nodded and continued to ask, "How is the Horse News Agency?" Hearing that Jerome Bonaparte actually asked about Horse News Agency, Pessigny's expression was slightly startled, not understanding what Jerome Bonaparte had for Horse News Agency, and Pessigny reorganized the language carefully. "The boss of Horse News Agency often contacts us, and it seems that he wants to cooperate with us again." "The grass on the wall," Jerome Bonaparte said calmly. "I see what you mean." Jerome Bonaparte's attitude made Pessigny think, "What? Do you understand?" Jerome Bonaparte looked at Pessigny with a smile on the corner of his mouth. "From tomorrow, there will be no Havas News Agency in Paris." Pessigny responded decisively. As the chief secretary of an imperial president, he can decide the life and death of a newspaper with a single word. "Don't be so murderous." Jerome Bonaparte raised his hand to stop Pessigny, and turned his head, and closed his eyes. President Jerome issued a final judgment to the Horse News Agency. "We will not go to the high ground of public opinion. If you occupy the enemy, you will occupy it. Instead of letting the enemy use it against us, let's occupy it first. Tell the Minister of Agriculture and Commerce and order the Department of Agriculture and Commerce to suspend all cooperation with Horse News Agency. Stable by Bonaparte take over the cooperation of Horse News Agency." "Yes." Pessigny nodded in response. The poor Horse News Agency did not know that it was precisely because they were so famous in the future history that a traveler could not help but greed for the power of heaven to seize everything from the Havas News Agency. However, Jerome Bonaparte believed that even if they knew, they would not dare to complain. They would only pray that Jerome Bonaparte would be able to spend 4 years sooner. Riyadh 1. Second, the power of the President of the Republic is unlimited. Tactical lean back, go. Jerome Bonaparte waved Pessigny away. Pessigny still bowed respectfully to Jerome Bonaparte and left. "Even I can't resist the poison of power." Jerome Bonaparte laughed at himself. Jerome Bonaparte got up and closed the curtain. On January 26th. The Gazette and Bonaparte jointly published a news about President Bonaparte will hold a military parade on January 29th, which detonated the whole Paris as soon as it was released. Anyone with a discerning eye knows what this news means at this critical junction in the cabinet's struggle with the National Assembly. General Changanier has always been on the side of the royalists. After the news spread, the Republicans couldn't sit still, and they had to look for Cavaignac, who had served as the consul of the French Republic. From Cavaignac's mouth, they understood what it means to take tea and cool off. Now they have no motivation to fight against them except for a small number of rangers. The Lamartine apartment on Rue Saint-Honoré. Lamartine, Bastide, Cavaignac and other Republican leaders gathered together to discuss the raid of the Party of Order. As the organizer of the conference, Lamartine said worriedly, "If those guys stage a coup before Lamartine could finish speaking, Cavaignac interrupted Lamartine. "They won't launch a coup." "Why?" Everyone focused on Cavaignac. Chapter 106, France Railway Report. In the face of everyone's questioning eyes, Cavaignac, who was born in the military, has no stage fright. After the coup d'état, power will be concentrated in Jerome Bonaparte's Élysée Palace. I have a deep understanding of this. Cavaignac said confidently. They don't want to concentrate power on that Italian boy. General. Cavaignac, do you mean that the purpose of their military exercise at this time is not for a coup d'etat? Lamartine, who was relieved in his heart, asked again. Compared to Cavaignac, Lamartine, who also served as the ruler of the republic, is like a newcomer to politics. The purpose of their military parade is to demonstrate against us. Bastide, who served as foreign minister, also pointed out the root cause of the problem. The purpose of publishing the military parade in a grand manner is to disrupt our army. Then what method should we use to deal with it? Lamartine then asked Cavaignac. Bastide and Cavaignac looked at each other. Bastide spread his hands and said helplessly, "There's no way." Cavaignac also added, "Changanier and Odilon Barrow obviously have the support of their party and the president, and we cannot defeat them through procedures. Then can we just sit and do nothing?" Lamartine shouted in despair. "Mr. Lamartine, no matter how much you shout, it's no use." Cavaignac, who had lost his power, said with a hatred of being irresponsible, "We have lost everything. The army, the police, the National Guard, and now we can only pray that they will be able to deal with it. Be kind." If it wasn't for these guys desperately opposing, he would have reached a cooperation with the Party of Order to become the first president of France. With the army and the police in his hands, he is fully capable of removing the Party of Order and returning a clean cabinet to the National Assembly. It's not like the remnants of some dynasties are sitting in the cabinet position, but these revolutionaries have been kicked out. By the way, President, we can influence the president. As long as the president doesn't agree, then everything can be saved. A voice came from behind Lamartine, and everyone noticed the guy behind Lamartine, who was Victor Hugo's son Charles. "Hugo, my father supported the president at the time, and he should be able to persuade the president to give up the military parade." Charles Hugo said excitedly, "I believe that the president will not want to see the Party of Order dominate, which is not in line with his checks and balances." Everyone was thinking about Charles Hugo's answer. From the point of view of maintaining checks and balances, the National Assembly has no trace, and Jerome Bonaparte really cannot kill the Republicans. P.S. The Republicans still regard Jerome Bonaparte as a passerby until the end of get out of class. Will this cause trouble to Mr. Hugo? Lamartine hesitated. As Hugo's friend, Lamartine really didn't want to see his old friend embarrassed. The Party of Order and the Republic belonged to two different camps. "No." Charles Hugo responded immediately. "Although my father is in the Party of Order, his heart is always with you. My father must be very willing to help." Under the circumstance of Charles Hugo's slap on the chest, Lamartine and others pinned their hopes on Victor Hugo. Lamartine personally went to the Place des Vosges to meet Hugo. After a brief discussion, Victor Hugo decided to help the Republicans overcome the difficulties. Victor Hugo took a stagecoach to the Élysée Palace. At this time, Jerome Bonaparte was sitting in a square room in the Élysée Palace, with imperial-style parapets and whitewood decoration. There are oil paintings and sculptures hanging on the walls. Although the oil paintings are not the works of celebrities, they also have a unique flavor. President Jerome Bonaparte wore a red velvet round head, and on his left sat a beautiful young woman, the Marquise of Alais. Morny and another estranged middle-aged man sat directly opposite Jerome Bonaparte. "Mr. President, I take the liberty to disturb you at this time." The middle-aged man clasped his hands on his thighs and said uneasily, "Alfred Pickard, isn't it?" Jerome Bonaparte showed a kind smile and said in a kind tone, "It doesn't matter. No matter when, I will be happy to fight with you on the front line, like you talk to the workers." The guy in front of him is a member of the railway committee that Morny is preparing to set up, and he is also a national engineer of the road and bridge unit. Today he arrived with Morn to report to Jerome Bonaparte on the task he had assigned to the Railway Commission. "Mr. President, all the materials are here." Alfred Pilker handed a stack of sorted materials to Jerome Bonaparte. Jerome Bonaparte, who received the materials, did not read the thick materials, but asked Pilker directly, "Mr. Pilker, I would like to ask if France is capable of completing the planned plan at this stage." Pilker said intermittently, if I didn't think about the funding issue." "You don't need to think about the financial issue. I just need to ask if you have any technical difficulties." Jerome Bonaparte said to Pilker, "There is no technical difficulty. We have been measuring and calibrating those railways for more than 10 years. Alfred Pickard explained to Jerome Bonaparte. Reading www.urkanshu.com. Very good. Jerome Bonaparte slightly. He picked up the documents and flipped through them and asked, Mr. Pickard, do you have the confidence to complete these routes within 5 years? Mr. President, we have the confidence to complete it. It's just. Pickard hesitated and did not speak. Just. What? Jerome Bonaparte looked up at Pickard. It's just that it is likely to cost hundreds of millions of francs. Alfred Pickard said through gritted teeth. We have roughly calculated the required costs, including Lyon-Marseille, Paris-Nancy-Strasbourg, Paris-Brussels, Paris-Bruges-Toulouse, Paris-Nantes-Brest. The cost of these main trunk lines is conservatively estimated to cost 100 to 200 million francs per year. Oh my god. Alfred Pickard's numbers did not frighten Jerome Bonaparte, but frightened the Marquis of Alais beside him. In 1848, the gold content of 1 franc was 0.29 grams, 100 to 200 million francs per year, which is equivalent to 29 to 58 tons of gold input per year. Don't worry about the cost. Trust the market's confidence in the railway. Jerome Bonaparte tried to console Alfred Pickard. P.S. I reviewed the Constitution of the Second French Republic and found that the power of the president in the Constitution of the Second Republic is close to that of an autocratic emperor. National Assembly can't do any damage to the president without forming an absolute advantage of 2/3. The president can complete the reorganization of the military power by replacing the Minister of War. In other words, as long as the president and the Minister of War are strong enough, they can directly put the parliament kicked aside. I really don't know what the Constituent Assembly thought, giving the president more power than the King of Orleans. Chapter 107, Army and Railroad. For Jerome Bonaparte, the early completion of the main lines of the French railway network, especially the construction of the Paris-Strasbourg and Paris-Marseille railways, is a top priority. The former is that Jerome Bonaparte is an important reliance to attack Germany in the future, and the latter is to prepare for the Crimean War in a few years. He does not want to rely on Britain's transportation capabilities like his cousin in history. Establishing his own perfect army logistics support system was his first move to reform the army, and opening up the railway network in Marseille was also the first in leveraging the army's logistics support. In that case, he is no different from his historical cousin. Please rest assured, Your Excellency, that it will be completed within 4 years. Alfred Pickard, a technical advisor and a member of the Railway Commission, assured Jerome Bonaparte with a pat on his chest. Although he is still a little worried about whether the Ministry of Finance will approve this project, since Mr. President has repeatedly assured himself that the funds would be in place. If he continues to pour cold water, I'm afraid that he will pack up and leave. As a technocrat, Pickard only needs to complete the tasks that the president and the country have given him. That's right, Mr. Pickard. Jerome Bonaparte continued to look at the information sent by Pickard and said, if Jerome Bonaparte repeatedly emphasized, if a team of about 100,000 people gathers in Paris and arrives in Marseille by train in batches, can you deliver them completely within 20 days, Mr. President? Alfred Pickard, who heard Jerome Bonaparte's assumption, looked at Jerome Bonaparte dully. He understood Jerome Bonaparte's the subtext is that he really can't find anything other than the army to transport 100,000 people at once. What does Mr. President want to do? Alfred Pickard couldn't help trembling in his heart. For a while, he didn't know how to answer Jerome Bonaparte, or he didn't dare to answer if he knew the answer. For Alfred Pickard, some things are better for him to know. He is only a middle-level bureaucrat in the national system. Thanks to Minister Morny's not giving up as a member of the Railway Committee, he should stand with Mr. Morny even more. Jerome Bonaparte saw Alfred Pickard's mood swings, and he quickly added, Mr. Pickard, I'm just asking you from the perspective of national defense. After all, France also needs some self-defense ability. We can't wait until others take the initiative to invade us before fighting back. It doesn't matter if we can't answer, just treat it as a lubricant, Mr. President. Based on the current system in France, there is still some difficulty in transporting 100,000 people within 20 days. Unless Alfred Pickard paused. Unless. What? Jerome Bonaparte asked immediately. Alfred Pickard glanced at Morny, gritted his teeth, and said his own conclusion. Unless the ability to increase the weight of the railway committee and the road and bridge troops need to keep a certain pace with the army. The plan given by Alfred Pickard reminded Jerome Bonaparte of the Ministry of Railways and Railway Engineers in his previous life. However, now is clearly not a good time to take the Railroad Commission out of the control of the Department of Public Works, leaving aside the approvals required to add a department to the French political system. The issue of the bonds that are now about to be issued by the Ministry of Public Works is a problem point. If the Railroad Commission was separated, railroad approvals, railroad company stock issuances, railroad issuances included in public Works bonds would all be cut from the Public Works Department. The Ministry of Public Works, whose interests have been damaged, will never let it go. It has no courage to confront it openly, but it still has a lot of courage to resist secretly. Once the progress is slowed down, Jerome Bonaparte will really be a steal. Not to mention the establishment of the Ministry of Railways. Who becomes the Minister of Railways is another big question. You can discuss the issue of the weight ratio of the Railway Committee with Minister Morny. The road and bridge troops and the army should also keep in touch from time to time. Jerome Bonaparte, who did not have enough authority, could only choose to avoid the problem. There was a hint of loss in Alfred Pickard's eyes, but he soon regained his strength. Minister Morny, railways are an important link in the prosperity and stability of our country's transportation, national defense, and even commodity trade. I hope you can strictly control and don't let the railways become the laughingstock of other countries. I will also go to Public Works from time to time. Ministry and Railway Side Survey. Jerome Bonaparte looked at Morny and said in a serious tone, for a bureaucratic France, the quality of the project often depends on the level of attention the leadership attaches to the project. Yes. Morny also knew that Jerome Bonaparte attached great importance to the railway, otherwise he would not willfully implement his railway policy. Through the contact in the past 2 weeks, Morny learned that Jerome Bonaparte allows those close to him to carry out some appropriate arrogance, but the premise is that you can do your job well. Otherwise, he will rebuke you mercilessly. Jerome Bonaparte, who had roughly flipped through half of the documents, put the documents on the table again, and said to Alfred Pickard and Morny, Mr. Pickard, Morny hope you can complete the railway as soon as possible. Commission preparations Riyadh 1. I hope to see the railway start in the second half of this year. No problem. No problem. Morny responded immediately. There are still nearly 5 months until the second half of the year, which is enough time for him to start construction and issue the first tranche of bonds. If you have nothing to do, please do it. Jerome Bonaparte euphemistically ordered the two of them to be expelled. Morny and Alfred Pickard left, leaving only Jerome Bonaparte and Marcos Alais in the living room. Madam, you just heard the state secrets without omission. Jerome Bonaparte looked at Marcos Alais with an expression of annoyance, but his eyes were full of provocation. Then, what is your majesty going to do with me? The Marchioness of Alais squeaked. She moved the chair to Jerome Bonaparte's side and rubbed her full breast against Jerome's arm. It goes without saying, then. It depends on what you mean, madam. Jerome Bonaparte teased nakedly. The Marchioness of Alais giggled with a smile. As Jerome Bonaparte's old lover. Of course she understood what she meant. Her pale arms were placed on the back of Jerome Bonaparte's neck, and her body sat on Jerome Bonaparte's thighs just when the two were about to kiss each other. Pesani broke into the room. Upon seeing this, the Marquise d'Alais wanted to separate, but Jerome Bonaparte hugged her tightly and motioned Pesani to continue with his eyes. Pesani, who was not surprised by such a scene, walked up to Jerome Bonaparte and said, Your Majesty, Mr. Victor Hugo is here. Chapter 108, Victor Hugo interview. Hugo? What is he doing here? Jerome Bonaparte, who was preparing for the next move, had a sullen face, not to mention how unhappy he was. Your Majesty, I don't know either. Pesani said helplessly. However, judging from Mr. Victor Hugo's expression, he should be looking for you in a hurry. What trouble? Jerome Bonaparte complained. For this literati who is famous throughout Paris, it is not okay to beat him or scold him. He has to let him. Would you like to tell Mr. Hugo, Your Majesty, that you are having an important meeting? Pesani proposed a solution. Jerome Bonaparte glanced at the incomparably huge Marcos of Alais sitting on his lap and subconsciously responded, yeah, it's really heavy. Afterwards, Jerome Bonaparte, who realized that he had said something wrong, hurriedly added, forget it. Let Mr. Victor Hugo go upstairs. Yes. After Pesini responded, he closed the door again and left. Ma'am, it seems that I can't have an in-depth exchange with you. Jerome Bonaparte still expressed regret in a provocative tone. Your Majesty, I'm waiting for your summons at any time. Marcos Alais flirted with her golden curls and threw a charming look at Jerome Bonaparte. Jerome Bonaparte let go of the arm that was encircling the Marcos of Alais. The arrival of Victor Hugo means the departure of the Marcos Alais. Just as the Marcos of Alais was about to leave the living room, she heard Jerome Bonaparte behind her say, Madam, please let your husband pay attention to the bonds of the Public Works Department that will be issued in the near future. Believe me, it will be a solid profit. A no compromise deal. Bullying people's wives for so long, they always want to give them some sweetness. If you want to live well in Paris, unless you have a little green on your head. Of course, this rule does not apply to Jerome Bonaparte himself. Because he's about to be the one who sets the rules of the entire Paris game. Marcos Alais, who understood Jerome Bonaparte's subtext, turned around and bowed slightly to Jerome Bonaparte and said, I will tell my husband. Under the leadership of the attendants, the Marcos of Alais left the Élysée Palace through the back door. Not long after, the door of the guest room opened again, and Persigny and Victor Hugo entered. Jerome Bonaparte hurriedly got up to meet the great writer of the 19th century. Mr. Hugo, welcome to the Élysée Palace. Jerome Bonaparte stretched out his hand to hold Victor Hugo's hand. Victor Hugo responded hurriedly, Mr. President, Mr. Hugo, please don't call me that. I still hope you can call me by my name, or call me Prince. Jerome Bonaparte tried to pull in Victor Hugo's relationship, His Excellency the Prince, in the face of Jerome Bonaparte, who was very kind. Victor Hugo had no choice but to choose the title Prince. Under the guidance of Jerome Bonaparte, Victor Hugo sat in the seat of the Marcos of Alais. Jerome Bonaparte, who was sitting back in his seat, asked Victor Hugo, Mr. Hugo, I don't know why you came to see me today. Victor Hugo immediately stated that he was entrusted by the Republicans and wanted to persuade Jerome Bonaparte to abandon the plan of the military parade. Your Majesty, now only you can stop them. Victor Hugo said sincerely to Jerome Bonaparte. Jerome Bonaparte stood up from behind Victor Hugo pretending to be frustrated, and then sighed. Mr. Hugo, you have a high opinion of me. I must respect the opinions of the majority. So are the Republicans. Victor Hugo tried to get Jerome Bonaparte to change his mind. Mr. Hugo, you don't understand. Jerome Bonaparte shook his head and said, they control the cabinet and the army. I'm just a nominal president. The decision of the military parade is not mine. And with them, Jerome Bonaparte tried to weaken the power of his own president, so that the party of order would become the enemy of the republic. But Victor Hugo still tried to argue. Mr. Hugo, I have to be on their side to ensure that they won't stage a coup. If they stage a coup, the republic will be finished. Jerome Bonaparte continued to bluster. As long as you don't agree, there's nothing they can do. Victor Hugo continued to persuade. No way. The cowardly Jerome Bonaparte responded. No matter how Victor Hugo persuaded, Jerome Bonaparte was just beaten to death and unwilling to fight against the party of order. Victor Hugo could only give up. Before leaving, Victor Hugo once again asked Jerome Bonaparte to think about it. The cowardly Jerome Bonaparte once again chose to support the party of order after an ideological struggle. Afterwards, Victor Hugo left the Élysée Palace with a feeling of loss at Lamartine's house. Victor Hugo told all the Republicans about the situation at the Élysée Palace. We miss Mr. President. Cavaignac said in a depressed mood. I thought the Emperor's nephew should be a hero. I didn't expect www.riyadh1.com to be a coward, compared with Cavaignac, who wrote disgust on his face. Bastide obviously has the quality of being a diplomat who does not panic, and he carefully analyzes the situation of both the enemy and us. We can only show the enemy's weakness now, and I hope they will not get on us. It's not a wise choice to count on them. Lamartine responded. Everyone, what else can we do now? Bastide glanced at everyone present with stern eyes, and he said loudly, "We have lost the government, the army, and now we can't do anything. We still have the Rangers." Lamartine wanted to Mr. Lamartine, "Do you want the Rangers to be the second victim struggle?" Bastide responded coldly, "All we can do now is wait." "Then how long will it take?" "Wait until they are hated by all of France." On the afternoon of January 27th, after a heated discussion, the Republicans, who understood their situation, gave up their resistance completely, unaware that their non-resistance policy would sweep them out of Parliament. On the night of January 28th, with the signing of the order of the Minister of War Ilia's military parade, Changarnier, the commander of the Paris National Guard and the commander of the regular army, quickly assembled his team. Among them, there are 45,000 people in the National Guard of Paris, about 20,000 in the capital regiment stationed in Paris, and 30,000 in the suburban regiment. After the troops of the capital corps were quickly assembled, they were stationed in the area centered on the Paris municipal government. The Bourbon Palace was once again protected, and the soldiers of the two regiments were stationed near the Bourbon Palace again. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 109, Military Parade. 1. January 29th, 1849. In France in January, the nights are always long and the days are short, and the sky at 6 o'clock is still dotted with stars. The grey-black sky and the howling cold wind shrouded the whole of Paris, making it feel an inexplicable depression and trembling, like a very today's Paris. Under the grey-black sky, the study room of the Élysée Palace unexpectedly lit up. Through the candlelight emanating from the study room, one could vaguely see a figure appearing by the window of the study room. He was Jerome Bonaparte, with a Napoleon hat on his head, a blue and black leather dress, a Legion of Honor medal on his chest, and a pair of leather boots on his feet. Jerome Bonaparte was standing by the window, gazing at the soon-to-be white sky in the distance, and then using out of the corner of the eye, he glanced at the gilded pendulum sitting next to him. There are still more than 4 hours before the start of the military parade. This is the earliest time when Jerome Bonaparte has woken up since he became president, and it is also the first military parade in Jerome Bonaparte's career as president. Ceremony. In the heart of every man, he always hopes that he will become a general who can command thousands of troops, and Jerome Bonaparte is no exception. He just lay in bed and slept, for fear that he would miss the military parade the next day, but lying on the bed, he was not at all sleepy at all. Just before falling asleep, Jerome Bonaparte, with a strong inner hint, only slept for 3 hours and 30 minutes before being woken up by the biological clock. After waking up, he carefully put on the clothes he prepared the day before and went to the study alone holding a candlestick with 4 candles, waiting for the start of the military parade. He came to the study carefully and did not disturb anyone in the Élysée Palace. Even the 4 soldiers who were in charge of patrolling the Élysée Palace at night did not discover it until the light appeared in the study. In the study, Jerome Bonaparte paced back and forth with his head lowered. From time to time, he would come to the mirror to tidy up his uniform or adjust his Napoleon three-cornered hat on his head. In short, President Jerome Bonaparte was very anxious. As time passed, the stars disappeared quietly, the sky was no longer grey and black, the hot sun slowly rose from the horizon, and the whistling cold wind gradually weakened with the dawn. The time came to 7:30. Pessigny, who got up early in the morning, yawned and went to the president's bedroom to wake up Jerome Bonaparte, since the police chief, Colonel Fleury, was assigned by Jerome Bonaparte to serve as a full-fledged colonel on the staff of the National Guard. The job of waking up Jerome Bonaparte has been handed over to Pessigny. Pessigny, who entered the president's bedroom, did not find Jerome Bonaparte, and he was instantly refreshed after being exhausted. It stands to reason that His Majesty should be sleeping in the bedroom at the moment. How could it suddenly disappear? The president's disappearance caused Pessigny to panic. He ran out of the bedroom in a panic to tell them about the president's disappearance. At this moment, the door of the study slowly opened, and Jerome Bonaparte came out of the study. "Your Majesty, you..." Pessigny stared at Jerome Bonaparte, who was already dressed in surprise, with wide eyes. "What's the matter, Secretary General Persigny?" Jerome Bonaparte looked at Persigny in surprise, then glanced at his clothes and asked curiously, "Is there anything dirty on my clothes?" "No. No." Persigny, who had recovered his senses, denied it. "I just feel. Persigny struggled with what words should be used to not offend the president, but also to explain. "I think my routine is a bit abnormal, don't you?" Jerome Bonaparte said what Persigny didn't want to say, and then explained, "It's the first military parade, and it is inevitable that you will be a little excited." "Yeah." Persigny nodded in understanding. At 8:30 a.m., a group of cavalrymen dressed in brown red war horses arrived at the gate of the Elysee Palace. Residents coming and going on the street looked at the clothes of the soldiers in surprise. Some elderly residents had 3-point pride in their eyes. I was moved by 7 points. Wearing the green dragoon uniforms of the First Empire, and wearing high-top military caps with feather collars, they seemed to have returned to France after more than 30 years, and the empire seemed to be back. As the leader of this cavalry team, Colonel Fleury of the National Guard staff and his deputy Edgani wore red dragoon uniforms with a command knife tied to their thighs, much like the cavalry under the emperor officer. The team stopped in front of the mansion of the Elysee Palace, and Fleury, the temporary commander of the army, straightened his chest and gave the order like a bell, "Get off the horse." All the dragoons got off their horses in unison, and they led the horses to the left and right of the gate of the Elysee Palace. A gilded open-top double bridge carriage with a beautiful golden bee pattern and a thin white lino. The drapery was gilded. The hooks are hung on both sides of the car window, so that people can see the equipment inside at a glance. The double bridge carriage slowly drives into the road, made of cement under the driving of the driver, and enters the courtyard of the Elysee Palace. Riyadh1.com, and stop at the main entrance of the Elysee Palace. Inside the Elysee Palace, "Your Majesty, it's time for us to get in the car," Persigny said to Jerome Bonaparte. Jerome Bonaparte, who was in high spirits and was about to ride a horse, lost his interest in an instant, and his face became slightly gloomy. "Secretary Persigny, can't I ride by myself?" "Your Majesty, I heard that there are many rebels in the carriage city. We must give priority to ensuring your safety," Persigny explained to Jerome Bonaparte. "What? A joke?" Jerome Bonaparte laughed angrily. He pointed to the carriage parked outside the door and said, "A few mice that are not visible make you so frightened. The Marshal and General under my uncle's back, then there is nothing like you." Jerome Bonaparte, who was unwilling to give the army the impression of being detached from the masses, steadfastly refused to take the double bridge carriage. Persigny, who could not resist Jerome Bonaparte's attitude, could only take a step back and let Jerome Bonaparte ride the horse, provided that Jerome Bonaparte must be in the protection circle of the dragoons until the official parade start. Jerome Bonaparte agreed to Persigny's conditions. Under Persigny's arrangement, Turin led a white horse and a brown-red war horse to the main entrance of the Elysee Palace. The horses were equipped with brand new horses harness. Jerome Bonaparte and Persigny mounted their horses, carrying Jerome Bonaparte on a white horse, and walked in front, and Persigny walked behind. The courtyard surrounding the Elysee Palace came to the gate of the Elysee Palace. Fleury and Edgani are anxiously awaiting the arrival of Jerome Bonaparte. It was already 8:30 minutes, and there was still an hour before the start time. Chapter 110, Military Parade. 2. Your Majesty. Fleury looked at Jerome Bonaparte on the white horse in surprise. He did not understand why Jerome Bonaparte, who was supposed to be in the carriage to review the procession, rode on the white horse. Don't Your Majesty know what's going on in Paris recently? Thinking of the recently rumored rebels who wanted to assassinate the president, Fleury couldn't help frowning. Of course, it wasn't just Fleury who was surprised. His deputy Edgani and the pseudo-dragoon soldiers also rode over to Jerome Bonaparte. After a short period of surprise, these dragoon members actually felt a sense of honor and disgrace. They involuntarily straightened their bodies, and their expressions became more and more solemn. The subtle changes in the dragoons were naturally hidden from Fleury's eyes. Now that things have happened, it's probably impossible for Fleury to stop them. The most urgent task is to protect Jerome Bonaparte. Fleury shouted again with his unique voice. Get on the horse. Divide into 2 teams to protect the president. The recovered dragoons quickly stepped on their horses and mounted their horses. A group of dragoons divided into two teams and came to Jerome Bonaparte. The commander of the team, Fleury, came to Jerome Bonaparte and put his right hand on the brim of his tall military cap to salute Jerome Bonaparte. The deputy commander and the dragoons also saw this, saluting Jerome Bonaparte. Looking at the group of young guards Jerome Bonaparte in front of him, he smiled slightly, and he also returned the salute seriously to present, "Your Excellency, we will protect your safety as every 1-year inspection bodyguard." Fleury, who put down his right hand, routinely reported to Jerome Bonaparte. Jerome Bonaparte also put down his right hand and nodded slightly to show his understanding. The two teams of dragoons were closely surrounding Jerome Bonaparte on the left and right sides. Edgarny, Fleury, and Persigny were the pioneers to open the way, and Jerome Bonaparte was held in place. The circle of dragoons will protect Jerome Bonaparte with their lives. Fortunately, there was no rebel attack from the Élysée Palace to the City Hall, and the team came to the City Hall in an orderly manner. Thousands of soldiers armed with weapons formed a phalanx to surround the entire City Hall point. Although the mayor and the senior bureaucrats of the City Hall knew that such a big battle was not aimed at them, they still did not dare to take any action point after seeing the Green Dragoons. The old General Changanier riding a white horse whispered to Odilon Barrow, who was not supposed to be here, mocking, "Our Mr. President is really a competent imitator. He has taken out everything that has been in existence for more than 30 years. Odilon Barrow just smiled slightly and then said to Changanier, "General Changanier, it's time to start." General Changanier commanded the adjutant beside him with a solemn expression, "Let's start." "Yes." The adjutant, who received the order, hurriedly drove his horse and felt that the semaphore officer was in front of him and asked him to convey the order. In semaphore point, the flag commander waved the flags in his left and right hands to give an order, and the order was conveyed layer by layer through the hands of the flag commander. After a brief disturbance, the troops regained their calm. The dragoons dispersed less than 50 meters away from Changanier and Odilon Barrett, and Jerome Bonaparte appeared. Odilon Barrett and General Changanier drove to Jerome Bonaparte point. Jerome Bonaparte was a little surprised by Odilon Barrow's presence, but he was relieved quickly. After all, Odilon Barrow and Changanier are still from the same party. Although there are still considerable differences in the struggle between the two of them, the focus is still on the Republican Party. "General Changanier, Mr. Chancellor," Jerome Bonaparte said to the two of them, "Your Excellency, the National Guard of Paris and the garrison of Paris capital, please review." The old General Changanier saluted Jerome Bonaparte. "Yeah." Jerome Bonaparte returned the salute to Changanier, accompanied by Changanier and Odilon Barrett. Jerome Bonaparte began to inspect the troops according to Changanier's introduction. The troops at the front were the troops that contributed the most to the June Revolution. The executioners with blood on their hands saluted Jerome Bonaparte and shouted together, "Long live the Republic." Jerome Bonaparte showed a reluctant smile and rode away. The second phalanx was the troop whose credit was second only to the first phalanx. Like the first phalanx, the second phalanx also shouted loudly for the same. "Long live the Republic." Jerome Bonaparte reviewed more than 10 square formations in a row, and the slogan of each square was probably "Long live the Republic." The square that leaned slightly to the left even shouted the slogan "Long live the Social Republic." The whole scene fell into an embarrassment. Jerome Bonaparte, who originally wanted to hear the troops shouting "Long live Bonaparte" or "Long live the Prince," was a little disappointed. P.S. Jerome Bonaparte did not know that Changanier pulled most of the teams loyal to the emperor to the suburban legion in the suburbs of St. Denis and St. Anthony, where he at one point come "Long live the emperor." The sound was so deafening that the city center couldn't hear it at all. Jerome Bonaparte, riding a white horse, went all the way to review, from the town hall to the Bourbon Palace point. Just when Jerome Bonaparte was about to review the Bourbon Palace team, an accident happened. One of the head of the regiment in charge of waiting for the review at the Bourbon Palace came to Changanier, Jerome Bonaparte and others with a livid face and said, "Report to the president, Commander. We found that another group of the same thug with the same ingredients every day." It turns out that when Changanier entered Paris, he had already started consciously arresting the Montagnards. 50 Mountain Party members were directly arrested without trial and detained in the police department prison. "What? There are even thugs?" Changanier glanced at the head of the regiment in shock and then turned to Jerome Bonaparte. "Since it's a thug, just arrest him." Jerome Bonaparte, who was acting with Changanier, said immediately, "But the expression of the leader who won the true biography of the best actor is comparable to that of the Oscar-winning actor of later generations. What's the matter? Is there any difficulty?" Jerome Bonaparte had to ask along the script. "The identity of those thugs is a bit special," the head of the regiment said. "They are from the Rangers." "What? The Rangers are also participating in the riots?" Jerome Bonaparte looked at the regimental commander in shock, and then said to Changanier with gritted teeth, "It is urgent to disband the Rangers. They can no longer be used as an armed force to defend the Republic. If left like this, they'll become armed thugs. Follow your orders." Changanier readily accepted Jerome Bonaparte's order. Chapter 111, Military Parade. 3. Changanier, who was ordered by France's nominally highest military commander, Jérôme Bonaparte, gave the order to disband the Rangers to the adjutant beside him. The adjutant, who had been preparing for a long time, immediately gave military salute to Jérôme Bonaparte and Changanier, and then drove his horse to the suburbs of St. Denis. For why the Rangers are in the suburbs, not in the city center of course, in order to prevent the riots during the dissolution process from affecting the mood of the review. Changanier specifically instructed the adjutant to arrange the Rangers in the suburbs of St. Denis. In the event of a rebellion, the suburban legion can eliminate members of the Rangers on the spot without disturbing Paris. After the adjutant left, Changanier and Odilon Barrot had smiles on their faces. They finally eliminated this uncontrolled armament. "Your Excellency, let's continue the review." Odilon Barrot drove his horse to Jérôme Bonaparte and said, "Yeah." Jérôme Bonaparte slightly, and continued to review the troops. Accompanied by Changanier and Odilon Barrot, Jérôme Bonaparte once again reviewed the soldiers of the 2 infantry regiments stationed in the Bourbon Palace. Changanier drove his horse to the front of the infantry phalanx. He waved his hand and shouted, "Long live Bonaparte! Long live the Emperor!" With General Changanier's leading call, the officers of the 2 infantry regiments instantly received a signal. They no longer forcibly suppressed the soldiers' admiration for the Emperor, but instead joined in and shouted with the soldiers, "Long live Bonaparte! Long live the Emperor! Long live Bonaparte! Long live the Emperor!" The slogan spread like a plague in an instant, and the soldiers of the infantry phalanx centered on the Bourbon Palace dragged their MTL 1842 front loading behind guns their backs and shouted, "Cavalry!" The cavalry in the phalanx also raised the saber on their waists to the top. The saber under the sunlight emitted a dazzling silver light, and the repeated shouts were like the reappearance of the Empire. Jérôme Bonaparte waved to the soldiers present with a smile. If anyone pays close attention, they will find that Jérôme Bonaparte's waving movements are so mechanical, and his smile is also so rigid. Jérôme Bonaparte on the horse understood that the slogan "Long live the Emperor" was a small return from Changanier and others for Jérôme Bonaparte's order to disband the Rangers, and at the same time he also warned Jérôme Bonaparte invisibly. Bonaparte, with the entire army of Paris and its outskirts in their hands, was their puppet. Wait and see. You can't be complacent for long. Jérôme Bonaparte was once again determined to remove Changanier, of course. Besides Jérôme Bonaparte, the members of the Republican Party and the Mountain Party were also unhappy with the Party of Order at this time. They are being protected in the Bourbon Palace by loyal French soldiers. The shouting outside the Bourbon Palace made the Republicans and the Mountain Party in the Bourbon Palace very uneasy. They didn't know whether the group of bastards would invade the Bourbon Palace and announce that they would no longer enjoy the protection of the Constitution and become national traitors. Many terrified moderate Republicans took the seats of the Party of Order in the eyes of the Republicans. The French political parties in the 19th century were different. The United States was as close as England, and the parties could be exchanged back and forth. MPs from the Party of Order can become Republicans in mountains, and the mountains can also switch to the Republicans. The price to pay for switching camps is simply to move to the seat of the corresponding party. Facing the participation of moderate Republicans, members of the Party of Order headed by Thiers stood up and applauded. The National Assembly of the Palais Bourbon gave a warm applause. "Welcome to join. Joining us is the wisest choice." Thiers shook hands with the defectors and the moderate Republicans. In turn, the moderate Republicans who defected sat down again under Thiers' arrangement, and the Party of Order, which had 350 seats in the parliament, suddenly became 370 seats, if you take out the 80 Montagnards who were raided and arrested the night before. The party of order in parliament has become a veritable majority. Of course, the blatant coercion and induction by the party of order obviously made Ludra Roland of the Mountain Party look down on him, and he raised his hand. Speaker Marist, who was sitting on the rostrum, tapped the wooden hammer to signal silence, and then asked Ludra Roland, "Mr. Roland, what do you want to say?" "I protest." Ludra Roland stood up and rebuked the party of order. He pointed at Fears and said, "I protest that the party of order threats used to let members join them. They are trampling on the Constitution of the Republic." Cut. The party of order made a sound, and they dismissed Ludra Roland's accusation. Member Roland. Fears got up and said unhurriedly, "We didn't use threats to force members to join us. They joined us voluntarily. Your Mountain Party will not allow people to quit. You." Ludra Roland looked at Fears with disgust. "What's the matter with you deploying the army outside the Bourbon Palace? Don't you know that the National Assembly is sacred and inviolable?" "Of course we know." Fears said eloquently, "We know that the authority of the National Assembly is sacred and inviolable, so we transferred the army to the National Assembly to prevent accidents. Then, why did you arrest so many of our deputies yesterday? You arrest 50 at once." Ludra Roland questioned Fears again. "We have evidence to show that your congressman is in contact with a group of thugs." Fears, who had the chance to win, planted a crime against Ludra Roland's Mountain Party. "You." Ludra Roland couldn't say a word. He glanced around with a disappointed expression on his face. Not a single one of the people present was willing to fight against such a robber. Ludra Roland, who had lost his fighting spirit, could only sit back again. "Okay, gentlemen, now is not the time to talk about this. Riyadh1.com. We are going to talk about the Constituent Assembly." Fierce, who had been planning with Odilon Barrow for many days, used the army supporting the figure. He said, "I think the Constituent Assembly has fulfilled their responsibilities, and it is time to dissolve it." "No. The organization law has not been perfected. How can it be dissolved so quickly?" The bold Republican congressman objected. "We can elect and formulate at the same time." Fears heartedly chose a plan for the Republican faction, and then threatened, "Do you want to delay forever? The Republic has been perfected, and the Constitutional Committee must be dissolved." Fears' tough attitude made the Montagnards and the Republicans look down on them, and they got up and wanted to crusade Fears. Seeing this, Morley, who also belongs to the Party of Order, quickly got up and said, "Since everyone is deadlocked, I propose the method of voting to decide whether the current constitution should be changed from constitution making to constitution making. In the case of losing 50 left-wing MPs, the vote must be unfavorable for the Democrats, but they have not found a reason to refute Democratic parties." This refers to the Republicans and the Mountain Party. Just as the Democratic parties hesitated, the sound of gunshots reached the Bourbon Palace. The faces of the Democratic Party congressmen changed drastically in an instant, and they all looked at Fears in unison. "No." One said that the parade can't fire a gun to celebrate. Fears said briskly, under the joint threat of the Party of Order and the Army, the Democratic parties could only humiliately agree to the proposal of the Party of Order. The proposal on the dissolution of the Constituent Assembly was passed by a narrow vote of 355 to 345. The National Assembly will be re-elected in March. The National Assembly, which won its prestige through the June massacre, has since been demolished. Chapter 112, Colonel Conrobble. Odilon Barrow, who was constrained by the dissolution of the Constitutional Committee, was stunned again. There is a saying that, if you want to destroy it, you must first make it crazy. This time, Prime Minister Barrow of the Return of the King not only disbanded the Republican Armed Rangers, but also put forward the two evil policies of restoring the salt tax and restoring the wine tax in one breath. France's tax revenue increased by 100 million francs because of the two major evils, but with the help of some conscientious people, Odilon Barrow is already notorious. The peasants near the Seine may not know Odilon Barrow, but when the name Odilon Barrow is mentioned, they want to chomp on their flesh and drink their blood. The Republicans and the Mountain Party, who were powerless to resist, could only choose to slap the table in the National Assembly, to protest to show their dissatisfaction, but in the eyes of the Party of Order, their protests were just flies buzzing in their ears, and there was no threat at all. This is not over yet, as Odilon Barrow's loyal son-in-law Leon Fushy once again dealt a fatal blow to the Republican faction in the Parliament. On January 31st, Leon Foch published a bill on the right of association in the National Assembly. The first article of the bill is to dissolve assembly activities such as clubs and cafes. If the Rangers are the guns of the Republican faction, then the club is the lifeblood of the Republican faction. The famous banquet movement in 1847 started from the club and spread to the whole of France. Although the Republicans in the National Assembly were fiercely opposed to the bill formulated by Leon Fauch, how could they beat the Party of Order when they were soft-spoken? With the help of the Party of Order, the Right of Association Act was implemented, and all assemblies in Paris, except the Party of Order and the Bonapartists, LSAs, were dissolved. The time for the Republicans and Mountains to be swept out of the National Assembly is just around the corner. Odilon Barrow, who swept away the opposition to the Party of Order in the National Assembly, began his ruling career. Jerome Bonaparte, who acted as a shopkeeper, was also not idle either. Odilon Barrow's fears focused on the cabinet and gave Jerome Bonaparte the opportunity to get involved in the army. Jerome Bonaparte, who wanted to strengthen ties with the military, immediately set up a military department. This department, attached to the secretary's office, mainly received letters from the military to the president. Jerome Bonaparte also stipulated that every letter must be checked and replied by himself, even if it was a letter written to him by an ordinary soldier. Jerome Bonaparte also replied to them seriously, without any pretense of other people's income. Over time, the news of the emperor's nephew's personal reply spread to the ears of all the soldiers stationed near Paris. The high-ranking soldiers and middle-ranking officers who were also eager to receive letters from the emperor's nephew wrote letters to the military administration and were looking forward to a letter from Jerome Bonaparte. The military administration receives nearly 100 such letters every day. Jerome Bonaparte read them one by one and replied to them. For a time, the light in the study of the Élysée Palace was on all night. The exhausted Jerome Bonaparte even fell asleep on his desk. He also tried to write letters on behalf of Jerome Bonaparte, but he refused. He was convinced that only in this way could he be known to the Parisian army and thus win the hearts of the troops stationed in the suburbs of Paris. Jerome Bonaparte also gave some Napoleon gold coins when he saw some complaint envelopes. The hard work paid off. Jerome Bonaparte's day-to-day replies and warm greetings paid off, and the army began to regard Jerome Bonaparte as a highness. Many of the new generation of officers at the school level, stationed in the corps in the suburbs of Paris, expressed a desire to get close to Jerome Bonaparte, who also often invited these officers to the Élysées Palace as a guest. Every Sunday night, the Élysée Palace becomes a gathering place for the school-level officers. Jerome Bonaparte in Lev's dress became the focus of the audience. The officers who were staggered in the cups affectionately called Jerome Bonaparte Your Majesty, and Jerome Bonaparte also called him. The officers present were future generals. The atmosphere of the banquet turned from the phrase "Long live the Empire, long live Bonaparte" to a climax, and all the officers' eyes flashed with a flame called ambition. Jerome Bonaparte can be sure that their ambitions can be used for their own use. Of course, the premise of all this is to give these babes have a feeling that they can win. Otherwise these rude but shrewd hooligans will not be able to. Willing to follow myself. Qiu Bei, who has experienced 3 dynasties, has accumulated the skills of a chameleon. One by one, these young warriors officers came to Jerome Bonaparte to toast to Jerome Bonaparte. Jerome Bonaparte suddenly remembered the wise saying of some dear friend that military culture is winery culture. You can't back down in front of this group of Qiu Bei. Jerome Bonaparte could only drink one cup after another, and he quickly drank the whole bottle of brandy. Just when Jerome Bonaparte was half drunk, a middle-aged man with strong Confucian strength, but slightly bald, appeared in front of Jerome Bonaparte. The wine glass said respectfully, "Long live the Empire." Compared to Qiu Bei, who had a hint of arrogance just now, the guy in front of him was a little more respectful. Jerome Bonaparte asked curiously, "Can you tell me your name conveniently?" The middle-aged man with bold curly hair straightened his back instantly, and the iron blood of a soldier showed on his body. "This subordinate is François Certain Canrobert, the current colonel of the Zouave regiment." Canrobel, Colonel, Zouave regiment. 3 key pieces of information instantly awakened Jerome Bonaparte's memory. The guy in front of him was not the one he was looking for. In history, after the fall of the empire, Canrobert still carried the banner of Bonaparte and worked hard for the restoration work in France. Although it was said that he failed to restore it in the end, his loyalty was indeed unmatched by other Bonapartists. Of course, subordinates who are both loyal and capable must earn income as soon as possible. Colonel Canrobert Jerome Bonaparte showed a kind smile and asked in a kind tone, "I remember that the Zouave regiment was in North Africa. Why are you here?" This subordinate is here for the award. Canrobert still showed a respectful attitude, just like Bonaparte's potential reserve team. "It's good to be awarded. It's good to be awarded." Jerome Bonaparte encouraged, "France just needs a general like you who can fight and win wars." "You are overrated." Canrobert replied, flattered. "When will you be awarded?" Jerome Bonaparte continued. "Tomorrow." Chapter 113. Preparations for the annihilation of Rome. Then Colonel Canrobert, "Can you please come to the Elysee Palace after the awarding of the medals? I will personally celebrate for you." Jerome Bonaparte raised his wine glass and naked extended an olive branch to Canrobert. He believed that Canrobert would definitely take his olive branch, facing Jerome Bonaparte's sudden olive branch. Canrobert was a little panicked for a while, but after a short period of panic, joy followed. Canrobert never thought that he received an olive branch from the emperor's nephew just a few days after he arrived in Paris. With an extremely excited mood, Canrobert said with a trembling voice, "How can I gain the trust of your majesty? If your majesty needs me, your subordinates are willing to do my best to help his majesty." After all, he drank the brandy in the cup. Jerome Bonaparte also drank the brandy in the glass. "This subordinate will not disturb your majesty." Canrobert, who knew how to advance and retreat, asked Jerome Bonaparte to leave. He could not occupy all the president's time. "Go." Jerome Bonaparte nodded in response. Under the jealous eyes of fellow officers around him, balded Colonel Canrobert strutted into the crowd. Next, the officers who had grown in their hearts introduced themselves to Jerome Bonaparte. However, compared with Canrobert, most of them are just unknown people. Jerome Bonaparte still maintained an attitude of neither humble nor arrogant to the officers present. The time gradually came to 1 o'clock in the morning. The army banquet was over. Some officers returned to their camps, and some returned to their hotels. Jerome Bonaparte, who was filled with brandy, was helped back to the room by Pessigny again. Until 2 p.m. the next day, Jerome Bonaparte, who woke up again, rubbed his sleepy eyes, and put on the uniform of the National Guard, and went out. Just when he was about to go out, Odilon Barrot kidnapped Jerome Bonaparte, and reported a situation to Jerome Bonaparte. Jerome Bonaparte had to come to the study with Odilon Barrot. In the study, Odilon Barrot reported to Jerome Bonaparte about the situation in Italy, Austria, Naples, Spain, demand intervention in the new Roman Republic. In the study, Jerome Bonaparte pretended to be astonished and asked again the accuracy of Barrot's news. "That's right," Odilon Barrot said with a wry smile. "According to reliable information, the Austrian Marshal Radetzky has divided his troops, and it seems that he is ready to intervene." "Humph. That old thing isn't dead yet." Jerome Bonaparte put on an expression of disgust. As a member of the Bonaparte family, Jerome Bonaparte has reason to hate this chief of staff of the coalition during the Napoleonic Wars. "That's right, and they've almost defeated the Sardinian dynasty," Odilon Barrot responded. "The Austrian army has degenerated to the point where it can only defeat second-rate countries." Jerome Bonaparte sneered again. Odilon Barrot, who knew about the grievance between the Bonaparte family and the Habsburgs, understood Jerome Bonaparte's attitude, and it was precisely because he was afraid of Jerome Bonaparte's interest that I will come over in advance to communicate with the president." "What is the attitude of His Majesty Pope Pius IX, who is staying in Lyon?" Jerome Bonaparte asked Odilon Barrot. Hearing Pius IX's Odilon Barrot's expression even more helpless, "The Pope's Secretary of State Antonelli has already gone to Naples. It seems that the Pope is very dissatisfied with our delay in taking action. Before it was because of the problem of form. Now." Jerome Bonaparte looked at Odilon Barrot. After pondering for a moment, Odilon Barrot responded, "What reason do we enter there? Although we have suppressed the parliament, we have not yet entered the stage of the legislative assembly. I can't guarantee that those guys will oppose us again." Jerome Bonaparte tapped lightly on the table with his index finger. After a while, he spoke again. "How about in the name of supporting the republic?" Odilon Barrow raised his eyebrows slightly. He didn't seem to understand what Jerome Bonaparte meant. We went to the port of Civita Vecchia in the name of supporting the Roman Republic. As long as we occupy that port, we can drive straight to the Roman Republic. In the end, we just need to hide our true intentions. Jerome Bonaparte explained to Odilon Barrow. This is indeed a good idea. Odilon Barrow nodded and agreed with Jerome Bonaparte's suggestion. Then, Mr. Prime Minister, you will bring this plan to your colleagues and the Party of Order. After that, we will discuss a time to send troops together. Jerome Bonaparte urged Odilon Barrow to leave quickly. Okay. Odilon Barrow, who didn't want to stay at the Élysée Palace, turned around and left the Élysée Palace point just when Jerome Bonaparte, who had finished dealing with Odilon Barrow, was about to leave the study. There was a knock on the door, and Jerome Bonaparte had to sit back in his chair and take a good posture. Please come in. Pessinny entered the study and reported to Jerome Bonaparte. Your Majesty Riyadh1.com Colonel Canrobert asks to see you. Then invite him in. As soon as the words came out, Jerome Bonaparte, who felt that something was wrong, quickly changed his words and said, I'll go pick him up myself. Under Pessinny's shocked expression, Jerome Bonaparte walked with him through the hall of the Élysée Palace to the main entrance point, standing upright at the main entrance of the Élysée Palace. Canrobert watched as he gradually approached Jerome Bonaparte with a flattered expression. Jerome Bonaparte looked at a brand new medal on Canrobert's chest. The front of the medal was a golden head of Napoleon and the back was a pattern of the French tricolour. He held Canrobert's hand tightly. Colonel Canrobert, congratulations on receiving the Legion of Honor. Your Majesty. Canrobert, who was held tightly by Jerome Bonaparte, responded excitedly. Jerome Bonaparte returned to the study with Canrobert and Pessinny. In the study, Jerome Bonaparte said to Canrobert with a solemn expression, Colonel Canrobert, I wonder if you would like to condescend to be my adjutant. Then, Jerome Bonaparte offered Canrobert generous terms. I promise you, at this time next year, you will become a brigadier general. In a few years, you will become a marshal. Canrobert, who has been a potential Bonapartist since the February Revolution, was happy to serve the Bonaparte family, not to mention the promise of Jerome Bonaparte. He immediately said, it is my responsibility to serve your Majesty. The greatest honor. Pessinny. Jerome Bonaparte pointed to Canrobert and ordered Pessinny, tell Minister Lelia that Colonel Canrobert will be my adjutant from today. Yes, I will tell Lelia. Chapter 114. Reorganize the General Staff. The news of Colonel Canrobert's appointment as aide-de-camp to President Jerome Bonaparte quickly spread throughout Paris through the reports of the Bonaparte. The people of Paris began to be curious about the colonel, who was kissed by the prince and president. In order to meet the gossip needs of the people of Paris, Bonaparte focused on deeply digging the life story of Colonel Canrobert in the next few issues. Under the description of the pen of the Bonaparte, one story after another in the style of romance has swept the entire Paris circle. The people of Paris were surprised to find that there was such a strong general in France. Rumors about Jerome Bonaparte's wisdom, who knew the talent, spread in Paris, and the adjutant Canrobert became the general star. Jerome Bonaparte has also become a veritable little Napoleon. This kind of down-to-earth propaganda has once again increased Jerome Bonaparte's popularity, linking Jerome Bonaparte with Emperor Napoleon, making Parisians' threshold for future coups lower and easier to accept change. After all, the enthusiasm of the Parisians for revolution will gradually disappear with the revolution and failure again and again. Not to mention that the people of the Seine have gradually become accustomed to the in and out of the army point. If there are fewer soldiers going in and out, they may not be used to it. Compared with the random guesses of the citizens of Paris, the officers who attended the banquet obviously understood what happened better. In their eyes, Canrobert belongs to the first person to eat crabs. The officers scolded Canrobert in their mouths, accusing him of kowtowing to Jerome Bonaparte in order to obtain a minister. At the same time, how could they not envy Canrobert for getting such a good opportunity? Under the policy of Jerome Bonaparte's daughter to buy horse bones, more and more people moved closer to the Élysée Palace. In order to gain power, a warm wind blew away the cold snap of January and February, as well as the tension in Paris. Although the spring equinox has passed, the weather in Paris is still a little cool. While Parisians took off their padded clothes one after another, they added a coat to the inner lining. Jerome Bonaparte was no exception. After taking off his slightly bloated coat, he put on a black flak corset. He was paired with brown red killie trousers and black leather shoes. He looked like a bourgeois upper-class gentleman. At this time, he was sitting in the study of the Elysee Palace, with a burly figure, but a slightly bald Colonel Robert, wearing a blue National Guard uniform, stood beside Jerome Bonaparte. Sitting across from him is the French Minister of War Liuli. Jerome Bonaparte introduced Robert to Liuli. Minister Liuli, this is my adjutant Colonel Robert. Hearing Jerome Bonaparte introduced himself, Robert's waist became more straight. That's right. Like a battle-hardened soldier. Liuli nodded with satisfaction, extended an olive branch to Robert and said, how is it? Are you interested in coming to our War Department for a seat? Robert did not answer Minister Liuli. He understood why he was able to receive an olive branch from the Minister of War in the final analysis. Because of President Jerome Bonaparte, the difference between a colon and the Minister of War is the difference between an ordinary person and a multimillionaire. Unless it is summoned by the Ministry of War, it is impossible for an ordinary colon to meet several times. Minister of War as for determining whether he is a good person or not by his standing posture, it is Liuli's polite words. If standing upright can gain the closeness of the Minister of War, Robert believes that there must be many people who are willing to train day and night in order to get close to the Minister of War. When the training is completed one day, the Minister of War may have already been transferred. Robert's silence put the scene into an awkward situation. Seeing that the atmosphere was getting increasingly anxious, Jerome Bonaparte hurriedly said, I can't ask for it. Minister Liuli, I remember that your War Department still lacks a Secretary of State, right? Liuli, who was about to say there was no shortage, changed his tune instantly. He nodded and said, yes. The Ministry of War now lacks a responsible and courageous Secretary of State. Immediately, Liuli looked at Robert again and said, we just need someone like Robert. Robert. Jerome Bonaparte said. Robert, who had been silent for a long time, finally spoke again. Yes, Your Majesty, I don't know if you are interested in being the Secretary of State for the War Department. This is also a kind of exercise for you, since Liuli gave Jerome Bonaparte an opportunity to intervene in the Ministry of War. Then Jerome Bonaparte would be sorry for Liuli's hard work if he did not intervene. Jerome Bonaparte was euphemistic. Convey to Robert that he wants to control the War Department. Robert, who has been in the army for more than 10 years, obviously understood what Jerome Bonaparte meant, and he immediately said, I'm willing to follow the orders of Your Excellency the President and the Minister. Riyadh1.com Go to the War Department to exercise. The Ministry of War welcomes a soldier who has made a difference like you. Liuli smiled and said to Robert. Afterwards, he turned his attention to Jerome Bonaparte and complained to himself, I've had enough of those soldiers in the War Department who ate their corpses. It's better to say that they are a group of politicians and soldiers. Don't be impatient, Mr. Minister. Jerome Bonaparte pressed his right hand and said, the operation of the army cannot be separated from bureaucrats, and of course it cannot be separated from those wars that really dare to fight. There is no bureaucratic coordination. An army that plans logistics will only fall into chaos before the war, and an army without a spirit will also not be able to win. We must learn to combine the two, so that they can effectively organize logistics, and allow them to have war power. Your Excellency, this is too difficult. Liuli complained, and immediately praised the conversation. Except for the Emperor and the marshals who follow the Emperor, they can take into account the characteristics of both. Mr. Minister, since there are still some gaps in our specific marshals, why don't we use an effective system to make up for individual wisdom? Jerome Bonaparte put his hands on the table. Sometimes, a mature system is more important than a single genius general. After all, a genius general is something that cannot be found, but a mature system can run smoothly. Your Excellency, what should I do? Minister Liuli put on a posture that he didn't want to study. The Ministry of War should plan its powers and responsibilities, and part of it should be political related work or military related work. Military work should not allow political personnel to intervene, otherwise there will be behaviors where laymen guide experts, and the same is true for political work. Chapter 115. One step back. Mr. President, I think this reform plan is too. After hesitating for a long time, Minister Liuli looked like he had constipation. Before he came to visit the president, he had already planned to arrange a position for the president next to him, Nen Shen, but he never imagined that the president not only wanted to put Ken Robel into the War Department as a Secretary of State, but also wanted to give the War Department a job. A surgery point. Where is the separation of powers and responsibilities? Isn't it just that he wants to weaken his power? Isn't this bullying honest people? Liu couldn't help but regret a little. Why did he go to the War Department? To go to the War Department in the first place? At this time, Liu had completely forgotten how excited he was when Odion Barrow invited him. At that time, he wanted to lick Odion Barrow's shy eyes. Now that the Ministry of War might be turning into a battlefield for political struggle, he couldn't help but back off. But, what difficulties can you bring up? Jerome Bonaparte said to Liu with an old-fashioned expression. I think. Liu hesitated for a moment, then reorganized his language and said euphemistically, I think the policy of separation of powers and responsibilities mentioned by His Excellency the President is a feasible solution, but as far as the current plan is concerned, rashly changing the existing army system is likely to accomplish some unexpected troubles, so I think it's better to do it gradually. Liu's standard bureaucratic tone, combined with his trembling expression, made Jerome Bonaparte even more convinced that the guy in front of him was an opponent who could bully. Jerome Bonaparte nodded in response. I know that any military reform will be accompanied by huge risks. Before Liu could breathe a sigh of relief, the president's next sentence almost stopped him from taking a breath. But I'm confident that, whether it is a minefield or an abyss in front of me, I will go forward bravely, without turning back, and doing my best. Jerome Bonaparte's firm eyes and awe-inspiring appearance make it difficult for people not to believe that the president will be right. A big shake-up in the War Department. In France, as long as rulers want to accomplish something, there is nothing that can stop them. The memory of the Great Purge once again awakened from Liu's mind. When the Orleans dynasty was established in 1830, many generals and senior officials loyal to Bourbon were directly dismissed because they were unwilling to be loyal to the Orleans dynasty. Your Excellency, I don't think it's necessary to hurt your bones. Minister Liu hurriedly dissuaded Jerome Bonaparte. He didn't want to be the first victim of the president. Jerome Bonaparte looked suspiciously at Liu with an expression as if saying, you big-eyed brows want to betray me. Minister Liu, I think the Ministry of War will not be broken or established. We should make drastic reforms. Didn't you just say that there are a group of people who eat corpses in the Ministry of War? I did it to cater to you. Liu's heart became even more frantic. He was over 60 years old and really didn't want to toss. He just wanted to be safe and secure in the War Department in the mud. Mr. President, I think the War Department needs to be reformed, but it cannot carry out radical reforms. My suggestion is that we start a pilot program in the War Department. Liu, who did not want to offend Jerome Bonaparte, decided to repeat the line. He advises Jerome Bonaparte, pilot? You mean? Jerome Bonaparte understood that Liu's window had been breached by Hin Pointer's brothers and said, Chinese people always like to compromise. For example, if you say that this room is too dark, you must open a window here, and everyone must not allow it. But if you advocate removing the roof, they will come to reconcile and open the window. This sentence applies not only to China, but also to French politicians. For them, political compromise is already commonplace. Your Excellency the President can set up a military staff in the Elysee Palace in the name of the President, and then connect it with the Ministry of War. In this way, some conflicts due to drastic reforms can be reduced. Liu told Jerome Powell Nabis made a suggestion. Although Liu understood that his approach would also produce conflict, it was a much milder approach compared to the War Department purges. In order to show the president that this is his last bottom line, Liu said softly, if you really insist on radical reforms, please allow me to resign as Secretary of War. Jerome Bonaparte thought for a moment, pretending to be serious, then got up and turned his back to Liu. Liu looked at Jerome Bonaparte uneasily. He was waiting for the final result of Jerome Bonaparte. This result will directly decide whether he will stay or stay. He is about to enter the coffin, and he does not want to be a thorn in the side of his colleagues and a helper in the purge. After a while, Jerome Bonaparte turned around and sat down again. Jerome Bonaparte did not respond to Liu immediately. In Liuli's view, the president's serious face has already explained his attitude. Riyadh1.com. Liuli's mood is a bit complicated. I've only been sitting for 3 months, and I'm about to lose it in a blink of an eye, and I'm a little unwilling to think about it. Your Excellency, please allow me. Liuli wanted to say the word resignation, but found that these 2 words were worth $1,000 to him. Jerome Bonaparte didn't wait for Liuli to finish speaking. He smiled and nodded and said, I agree. Liuli, whose mood was ups and downs like a roller coaster, almost turned his back, and he finally escaped. Thank you for your understanding. Liuli sincerely thanked Jerome Bonaparte. He doesn't know now that Jerome Bonaparte's purpose was not to cleanse the interior of the army. Mr. Minister, I hope you can recommend a group of capable officers to come, and I will set up a military staff directly under the president. Jerome Bonaparte said to Liuli. Of course, Liuli, who thought he had escaped a crisis, agreed with Jerome Bonaparte's request. Anyway, there are many people who graduate from the Saint-Cyr Military Academy in the Paris Institute of Engineering every year, and they can pull it out casually. A large number of reserve officers. In France in times of peace, not every student who graduated from a military academy could enjoy the treatment of an officer, and most soldiers who wanted to fight would go to Algiers. By the way, the best age is under 40. It is best to have combat experience in Algiers. Jerome added again. The older people are, the less easy it is to accept new things. Instead of discussing with them whether the staff should be reformed, they should not train more officers like Conrobel who are willing to change. Soldiers with combat experience are also what he needs. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 116, Roman Expeditionary Force. Minister Liuli, who left the Élysée Palace, showed a smile of the rest of his life. This trip to the Élysée Palace was a torture for him, an old man in his 60s. If he had to go through a few more times, he would definitely submit his resignation to the president. Returning to the Ministry of War, Liuli did not forget the mission assigned by Jerome Bonaparte. He quickly called the director of the personnel department and explained to him the mission assigned by the president. However, Liuli did not say that it was the task that the president gave. Minister, you mean under the age of 40? Still have combat experience in Algiers? The director of the personnel department asked Liuli again. He didn't understand what Liuli wanted to do because of the lack of key information. That's right. Liuli nodded and responded, Go, I'm going right now. The director saluted Minister Liulia and left point. Although he didn't know what Minister Liulia was going to do, as a trusted confidant who was promoted by Liulia, it had become his instinct to obey the leadership. Just when he was about to leave the minister's office, the director suddenly realized a problem. The minister didn't seem to have given him a limit on the number of people. He quickly turned around and asked, Minister, how many people do you need? The director's inquiry instantly made Liuli realize that he didn't seem to ask how many people the president needed. He could only vaguely say, just 60, 70 people. Liuli probably didn't realize that his vague response just met Jerome Bonaparte's need for manpower at the beginning of the formation of the staff. The director, who returned to the personnel department, quickly mobilized all the subordinates of the personnel department to find qualified officers. After nearly 2 weeks of overtime work day and night, the personnel department finally compiled a list. The director handed the list to the Minister of War and said, Minister, this is the list of members that meet your requirements. Looking at the dense French on the list, Liuli nodded with satisfaction and said, just contact them according to the list. What? The director looked at Minister Liuli in surprise. There were 68 people on the list. Among them, 20 are in the subordinate departments of the Ministry of War, and the remaining 48 are from Algiers. Although they were all low-level officers, as far as he knew, the War Department seemed to have no place to accept them. Mr. Minister, please be blunt. In order to keep his authority from being diluted, the director mustered his courage and said to Liuli, the Ministry of War cannot arrange so many people. If they swarm into the Ministry of War, I'm afraid it will cause the whole department is bloated. Bloated? Liu raised his head. Those sharp eyes seemed to pierce the director's heart. He snorted coldly and said in a bad tone, "Isn't the War Department not bloated now?" Don't look at Liu's helplessness when facing Jerome Bonaparte. It was all because of the condescending position of the president. Point in the face of a director whose level is lower than him. Liu is not so good at talking. I mean, we really don't need to recruit more people. The director, who learned that he offended the leader, could only bite the bullet and continue. For the sake of myself and the Ministry of War, I had to do this. I'm all here for the minister's good. The director silently rationalized and hypnotized himself in his heart. Don't worry, Earl Rendell. These people are not staying in the War Department, Liu said in a slightly sarcastic tone to the greedy subordinate in front of him. Then they? Count Rendell asked subconsciously. He suddenly thought that a few days ago, the prince and president seemed to have established a military secretariat. Announced, would they be transferred there? Damn, I should have thought of that. Count Lendl, who is almost 50 years old, regrets it very much in his heart. If he had reacted earlier, he would have sent his son, who just graduated last year, to the list. He believed that the minister would never expose the news that his son was stationed in Nantes. It's all too late now. Earl Rendell's annoyance was seen by Liu, and Liu couldn't help but despised his subordinates. Regrets were regrets, and Earl Rendell, who had reacted to his gaffe, quickly regained his meticulousness. Let's get in touch. I'm going to a meeting. After reading all the names on the list, Liu handed it over to Earl Rendell and issued an evacuation order. The unwilling Earl Rendell could only choose the list members and contact the list members. Looking at the names on the list. Earl Rendell has reason to believe. If the president can win, everyone on the list will be brilliant. Maybe I should turn to the president? Or thought poured out of Rendell's mind. Born in a traditional aristocracy, he should have been the one who opposed Napoleon the most, but now he is thinking of working for him. Blame Napoleon. He messed up everything. Jerome Bonaparte, who was sitting in the study at the Élysée Palace, did not know what was going on at the War Department. At this time, he was talking with Riegno, the commander of the upcoming expedition to Rome. General Riegno, I would like to congratulate you in advance on becoming the commander of the Roman Expeditionary Force. Jerome Bonaparte said exaggeratedly to the same bald general with a smile on his face. This is not an easy task. Work. General Renaud, who had just been promoted from brigadier general to major general, looked at Jerome Bonaparte with excitement and gratitude in his eyes. Riyadh1.com. To be able to command an independent army to fight is the dream of every general. If someone like him, who had just been promoted to major general, hadn't been helped, it would be impossible for him to take this beautiful job. Your Majesty, Rienio's excited words were no longer easy. General, you were expelled from the army because of the Bonaparte family. During the July dynasty, you didn't get promoted for 7 years because of my cousin. We should compensate you for that. Jerome Bonaparte said sincerely. Jerome, who learned from Colonel Dumour's connection with the Bonaparte family, had more reason to reuse this loyal general, and the war against Rome was his return to General Riegno. I will swear my allegiance to your Majesty and the Bonaparte family. General Renaud swore loudly to Jerome Bonaparte. General Riegno, you won't regret your choice today. I believe you will be able to become a marshal. Jerome Bonaparte promised Riegno, then changed the subject. I need you to take advantage of this opportunity. Go to the army to find a group of people who support us, and I will use them to clean up the War Department. Jerome Bonaparte believes that the army has never been a peaceful group, and that there is never a shortage of careerists in the military. As long as those careerists can be convinced that they can get what they want by following themselves, they will unite to their own before. Yes, Your Majesty. Riegno, who was more surprised than frightened, decisively took over the bridge between Bonaparte and the army. I believe that it will not be long before a large number of Bonapartists will appear in the army that goes to Rome. Chapter 117. Parliamentary Struggle. May 13th, 1849. In the days when the beginning of summer has passed and Zioman is approaching, the election of the Paris Legislative Assembly is drawing to a close point. The night the election results were announced, a torrential rain fell in Paris. Although the rain continued to pour down, the Bourbon Palace was still brightly lit. The candles on the crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling have all been lit, and the entire National Assembly Hall is shrouded in candlelight. Not only on the crystal chandelier, but also on the rostrum. 2 candles were also lit. Under the candlelight, Speaker Mastra sat on the rostrum with a stern face and waited for the parliament to start. The time gradually came to 8 o'clock in the evening. The rain gradually decreased, and the sound of insects pierced from the alleys of Paris. The first session of the Legislative Assembly officially started amid the continuous sound of insects. Speaker Mastra knocked on the gavel in his hand and shouted loudly, "Quiet!" The originally noisy parliament fell silent for a moment, and people all looked at the tumbler Mastra on the rostrum. Cough cough. Facing the silent parliament and the members watching him, Mastra cleared his throat and said, "Members, after 2 months of preparations and elections, we who waved goodbye to the Constituent Assembly, the Legislative Assembly was finally established. The French Republic moved from constitution making to legislation. This is a victory for democracy." As soon as Marist's voice fell, there was thunderous applause from the audience, among which the original Party of Order and now the Freedom Alliance applauded the most hard-working group. The Republicans and Mountains, who had experienced military exercises and the threat of a coup in January, completely lost their ability to compete with the Party of Order. Many moderate Republican MPs joined the Party of Order, which made the Party of Order directly in the next 2 months. It won 450 seats in one fell swoop, and the Party of Order, which occupies the vast majority of seats, successfully changed its name to the Liberty Alliance. How could they not thank the Legislative Assembly? The Mountain Party, which played the role of the loser in the January military parade, even won 240 seats, making it the second largest party in Parliament. There are 3 major parties in Parliament. As for the more miserable Republicans, they only won 60 seats. Under the strong targeting of the Party of Order, the Republican faction, which had been close to the Party of Order in seats, was completely expelled. The Mountain Party became the second target of the Party of Order's expulsion. The giants of the Party of Order, including Thiers, obviously do not want to see the existence of the guy with the mark of Robespierre, especially the Catholic rightists like Montalembert, who hate this guy even more. They are already gearing up to fight the Mountain Party. The Mountain Party knew nothing of all this, and they had somehow become the second largest party in the parliament, and now they could only choose to take a step-by-step. After Mastra Kang finished his official speech, the next step was the speech and report of the government representative Odi Lombero. Holding the speech, Odi Lombero stepped onto the rostrum and placed the speech on the rostrum, straightening his body, and said in a standard Parisian accent, "First of all, on behalf of the government, I would like to congratulate the establishment of the Legislative Assembly." "Okay," shouted the Party of Order in a loud voice. Odi Lombero continued with a confident smile. "In the past 6 months, our government has tried to cut expenses as much as possible on the basis of everything remaining unchanged." Odi Lombero shamelessly declared that under his wise leadership, the French government not only had no overspending in the first half of the year, but had some surplus. But he forgot that his 2 policies, to restore the salt tax and wine tax, brought nearly 100 million francs of fiscal revenue to France, but the balance of fiscal expenditure was less than 20 million francs. In other words, in the first half of 1849 annual spending has surpassed the first half of 1848. I believe that France's economy will get better and better in the future. Odi Lombero, who had finished his report, bowed like a victorious general like the members present, and waited for their inquiries. "Mr. Prime Minister, I would like to ask." Ladru Raland stood up and questioned Odi Lombero. He wanted to expose Barrow's lies. "You keep saying that the government has not exceeded its budget, but as far as I know, the government has greatly exceeded the previous budget. The government's budget for a year, we have not reinstated the salt tax and wine tax a second ago. At that time, we didn't abolish the progressive personal tax either." Odi Lombero sneered and insinuated that after the June Revolution, the Mountain Party and the Republicans joined forces to abolish the progressive personal tax. "This is not the time to talk about this," Ledru Raland said angrily, and then calmed down. "I would like to ask Mr. Prime Minister how to explain the public bonds issued by the Ministry of Public Works to the society recently. I heard that light first. The amount of issued bonds has been nearly 20 million. This ratio is whether all the bonds are used by the government. The actual first tranche of public claims amounted to 200 million francs. This is a special bond issued by the Ministry of Public Works for the construction of the railway. Everything is the responsibility of the Ministry of Public Works, and of course it does not include it. Audi Lombero responded immediately and said confidently, "We have made a plan. We have established perfect railway investment and management regulations to ensure that the previous situation will not occur." Congressman Ludreau, "We are stimulating the weak economy in France, boosting employment and consumption in France, and the public works sector is still responsible for its own profits and losses, and the parliament does not. There is no right to interfere with the operation of the department." Audi Lombero's explanation left Ledru and unable to argue that unemployment has always been a problem in the Republic. As far as I know, the construction of the Paris-Marseille railway has already begun. I believe that it will not be long before we can reach Marseille all the way. Audi Lombero said in exchange for the concept, "These railways do not need to cost the country a penny." The Party of Order, who knew the inside story, applauded immediately. Riyadh1.com This made the Mountain Party and the Republican Party, who wanted to find fault, a little unwilling. Audi Lombero, who had achieved his goal, stepped down in a round of applause. After Marseille emerged to announce the seats of their respective parties to all the members present, the first legislative assembly ended and everyone left the assembly. After the Congress, the 6 men, Audi Lombero, Thiers, Morlaix, the Duke of Broglie, the Orthodox, the Count of Montalembert, and the Count of Fallou, met at the Rue Poitiers to talk. "Mr. Prime Minister, your speech is really good. That guy Roland is going crazy." Montalembert, who was sitting on the sofa, praised Audi Lombero in a gloating tone. "Overrated." Audi Lombero responded modestly. The Duke of Broglie suddenly interjected, "By the way, you found that the loyal lackey of the Italian boy didn't seem to be here today." Principal Secretary Pesini may be helping his master build his little toy. Thiers said in a slightly sarcastic tone. "Little toys?" The Duke of Broglie's eyes were full of doubts. He had just entered Paris from the countryside and did not understand what Thiers meant. "It's the military secretariat." Mr. President's thinking seems to be still in the era of the Great Revolution. It is no longer the era when whoever controls the army controls Paris. Thiers, who has experienced 2 dynasties, obviously does not believe in the idea that Paris can be dominated by the army. In his view, the army is just a dispensable armed force. Don't see how Charles X and Louis Philippe, who control the army, fell to the throne. Only by firmly grasping the National Assembly can grasp the future. Thiers was convinced of this. Chapter 118, Empire 3 Heroes. Compared to Thiers with historical limitations, Jerome Bonaparte with God's perspective is clearly on the right path. Since the Party of Order has crushed him on the political capital of the National Assembly, why should he be confined to the framework of the National Assembly? Jumping out of and crushing the framework of the National Assembly is Jerome Bonaparte's best choice. On May 20th, after nearly 2 months of preparatory work, the General Staff Department of the Military Secretary Office, which is directly under the President, was officially established. In order to show that the President attached great importance to the Secretariat, Jerome Bonaparte intended to ask Pesini to choose a suitable place near the Élysée Palace to serve as the office of the Presidential Military Secretariat. Pesini ran around all the mansions near the Élysée Palace and finally found a suitable place to live. After much inquiries, we found out that the original owner of the palace was Louis Philippe, who was in exile in London. Jerome Bonaparte, who wanted to nationalize the palace, gave up the idea, taking into account the proportion of Orleanists within the Party of Order. Turned to Audi Lombero to discuss the use of the uninhabited palace as the office of the President's military secretary. Audi Lombero immediately agreed with Jerome Bonaparte's idea. In his opinion, letting Jerome Bonaparte play with his little toys is far less harmful than letting him do nothing about politics. After some chat, Audi Lombero euphemistically proposed the idea of granting funds to Louis Philippe, who lived in London. Jerome Bonaparte, who was unwilling to grant funds for Louis Philippe, had no choice but to talk to him. On May 23rd, all the soldiers elected to the president's military secretary office came to the newly established office early to wait for the arrival of President Jerome Bonaparte. At 9 a.m., an open-top gilt bridge carriage was parked downstairs in the military secretary's office. Looking at the striking golden bee family emblem on the carriage, the officer in charge of guarding the gate of the secretariat hurriedly trotted in. Not long after, 3 lieutenant colonel officers appeared at the door, and they trotted to greet them. "Mr. President." Jerome Bonaparte nodded one by one, and called out their names and ranks. Lieutenant Colonel Edmond Leboeuf, Lieutenant Colonel François Bazin, Lieutenant Colonel Louis-Georges Roche. The 3 lieutenant colonels whose names were called all showed excited expressions. They did not expect that their names could be remembered by the president. Obviously, they underestimated the importance of Jerome Bonaparte to the secretariat. If Jerome Bonaparte can't know their thoughts, Jerome Bonaparte will definitely complain in his heart, and the names of the 3 of you will be familiar in the textbooks of later generations. Edmond Leboeuf, the future Marshal of the French Empire, succeeded the dead Neil as Minister of War, and was also the last Minister of War of the Second Empire. During the Franco-Prussian War, he followed his cousin into the cage that Bismarck prepared for them. François Bazin, the future Marshal of the French Empire, commanded France's war in Mexico. During the Franco-Prussian War, he was besieged in Metz by old Mauricio, and the 170,000 troops surrendered without a knife, and France has since lost the last field army. During the Franco-Prussian War, Troche served as the governor of Paris and the commander of the National Guard. Later, the Second Empire was overthrown as the president of the defense government. Afterwards, he negotiated the surrender of France with Thiers and others. If Much, Ron, and Bismarck are called the 3 heroes of the German Empire, Leboeuf, Bazin, and Troche can be called the 3 heroes of the destruction of the empire. When Jerome Bonaparte first got the list, he almost wondered if it was a hint of God. Everyone else is a crouching dragon and phoenix, but I have one more than a crouching dragon and phoenix. Of course, after ranting, Jerome Bonaparte still had some understanding of the Franco-Prussian War. The problems of the Second Empire in the Franco-Prussian War were not all mistakes of military command, but a deeper system and institutional problem. The French army of 400,000 had to fight with the Prussian army of 1 million in the second phase of the standing force. Even if the French army had 3 heads and 6 arms, it would not be possible to win. Therefore, when Liuli handed over the officers' information to Jerome Bonaparte did not reject them. He believed in people's subjective initiative, and was willing to give them the opportunity to learn. "Hello, Mr. President." Leboeuf, the oldest of the 3 lieutenant colonels, shouted respectfully to Jerome Bonaparte. Seeing this, Bazin and Troche also showed due respect to Jerome Bonaparte. Jerome Bonaparte smiled and held out his hand to shake hands with them. Under the leadership of Leboeuf and others, Jerome Bonaparte came to a hall large enough to accommodate 200 people. All the members of the secretariat lined up in a square, staring at the front with a solemn expression. Jerome Bonaparte, who met them for the first time, shook hands one by one, and asked them their names and ages. Jerome Bonaparte, who had questioned everyone carefully, has now fully grasped all the information about the officer in general. This is a group of young warriors. Except for a small number of 40-year-old officers, most officers are generally around 20-30 years old. Most of them are lieutenant and school-level officers who entered Algiers just after leaving the military academy. While the actual combat experience www.riyadh1.com has not yet become stubborn, Jerome Bonaparte needs this kind of sharpness to become a military commander. Sit down. Under Jerome Bonaparte's orders, the officers sat down in order of rank. Leboeuf and Bazin sat on either side of Jerome Bonaparte. "Everyone, I think you should have many doubts in your hearts." Jerome Bonaparte glanced at all the officers present, and from their eyes he saw confusion, anxiety, and the ambition that would never burn out. "This is the guy I'm looking for. Ambition can drive them to serve me, crushing all enemies in the name of the country." There was a smile on the corner of Jerome Bonaparte's mouth, and his tone was still calm. "What are the secretary's offices, you want to ask? What functions do they have? In more naked words, what benefits can he bring us all?" The people present did not speak, but their eyes had spoken in their place. If I told you that the office of the president's military secretary is an auxiliary agency, would you still be happy to continue working? Jerome Bonaparte said, putting his hand on the table after turning around. Of course. Lieutenant Colonel Bazin was the first to show his loyalty to Jerome Bonaparte. Since Mr. President has transferred us from Algiers, we are ready. That's right. Yes, many. Agreed with Lieutenant Colonel Bazin. Jerome Bonaparte nodded with satisfaction. No matter what time, flattery would never be disgusting, as long as the flattery had to queue up. Your institution is somewhat special. Jerome Bonaparte stared at everyone present with sharp eyes. What is special about it is that your every move is related to the life and death of tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of people. Chapter 119. The prototype of the General Staff. Hundreds of thousands of people fighting? Jerome Bonaparte's voice was not very loud, but all the officers present felt a hint of coolness and fear. Since the Emperor's abdication, France has not carried out a massacre of more than 100,000 people for nearly 30 years. During these 30 years, France has only committed to small-scale public security warfare and anti-guerrilla warfare. The enemy of the army only needs to dispatch a few thousand to 10,000 troops to destroy them. It can be said that the whole of France, and even the whole of Europe, is about to lose the ability of large corps to fight together, and the most typical example is the Austrian Empire. During the period of 184,849, the Habsburgs attacked Hungary 3 times. The Croatian governor Josip Jelačić, Prince Windisch-Gritz, and the emperor did not defeat Hungary, which was composed of the National Guard, until the Russian Empire ceased to be special. Hungary only gave up resistance when Transylvania invaded Hungary. The army after the Napoleonic Wars had begun to degenerate in general. Of course, the war is not about fighting more and stronger, and the endless security war is likely to bring the army out of the abyss of the same level. Jerome Bonaparte clearly remembered that after the disintegration of Maoxing, the Eagle commander, who had deployed weapons around the world, was in command of Mao's house. The Eagle commander, who had rich experience in public security warfare, was surrounded by 2 tank divisions at the beginning. After that even more losing point at the end of the war, the Mao government army, which was in an offensive state, was instead counterattacked by the split East Mao. It can be seen from this that it is easy to fall to the same level after playing a lot of security wars. After a brief period of surprise, the expressions of all the officers present became excited. In any case, an auxiliary agency capable of commanding hundreds of thousands of people must not be taken literally. Lieutenant Colonel Leboeuf suddenly remembered that he had heard a certain military attaché in the Algiers colony once said that the center of power in the Prussian army was not the War Department and the General Staff, which was the auxiliary military institution. Thinking of this, the blood that should have been silent in Leboeuf's heart boiled again. For every soldier who aspires to make achievements, it is undoubtedly a great honor to be able to command a war of more than 100,000 people. History will leave them with an indelible mark, like the emperor and his marshals. Leboeuf glanced at Jerome Bonaparte subconsciously. He was not sure that the emperor's nephew could achieve the same feats as his uncle, but he was willing to give it a try. Watching the voices of the war conference hall getting louder and louder, Leboeuf, who is at the forefront of both power and age except for the president, cleared his throat and shouted, "Quiet!" Everyone stopped rioting, and they all looked at Leboeuf. Leboeuf's eyes signaled that Jerome Bonaparte could continue. Jerome Bonaparte told all the officers present what he had told Minister Liuli 2 months earlier. The officers, who felt lucrative, said that the decree must be separated, and that it would be better for them to hold the power to issue orders to the army. Jerome Bonaparte satisfied their imagination, and his fingers swept over all the officers present one by one. You will be the witnesses of this separation of the decree, and you are also the participants. Do you understand? Understood. All the officers present could not wait to use all their strength to shout. At this time they could not restrain their excitement at all. Okay. Very energetic. Jerome Bonaparte nodded with satisfaction. What he needed was a wolf that would bark and not hunt its prey, not a group of weak lambs. Mr. President. Troche gestured to Jerome Bonaparte, who had a question to say. What is our specific mission? I can't wait to get started. Bazin asked bluntly. He didn't want to waste his time in endless meetings. After thinking for a moment, Jerome Bonaparte continued, "Good question. As the military secretariat, you shoulder the fate of the entire France, and your task is to make practical preparations for a possible war." As soon as this statement came out, everyone present was stunned for a while. They did not understand what Jerome Bonaparte meant. Could it be that other countries are coming to invade France again? After hesitating for a moment, Leboeuf raised his hand cautiously and asked, "Mr. President, is someone trying to invade us?" "No, no, no," explained Jerome Bonaparte, shaking his index finger. "No one of them came to invade us." All the officers present breathed a sigh of relief. Although they like to invade other people's territory, they don't like to bring the front to the country. In that case, God knows what France will be ruined. What I mean is that in times of peace, we have to formulate some corresponding plans, predict the possible enemy and the location of the enemy, predict all kinds of complex possibilities, and distribute reasonably our forces. Jerome Bonaparte seriously said to the officers, "This is not an easy job. You reading www.urkanshu.com, that's why I asked you to come over. We are not trying to invade a certain country, we are just to make ours have more turns. Space, when the enemy arrives, mobilize as soon as possible." Many people present understood part of what Jerome Bonaparte meant, and their silent eyes revealed complex emotions. "So your first task is to collect as much information as possible in the area your group is responsible for. I need to know their numbers, religious beliefs, and even all the enemy's military strength in those areas." Jerome Bonaparte pointing at Leboeuf, he said, "Lieutenant Colonel Troche, who was still thinking about the meaning of the president's words, instantly reacted and got up and said, "Yes, you will lead a team of people to survey all the terrain, humanities and even the deployment of troops in the German region in eastern France. I need detailed information and maps." Jerome Bonaparte responded to Leboeuf, "Yes." Troche responded again, "Lieutenant Colonel Bazin, you are in charge of the terrain and all the information on the Italian region in southern France. You can communicate with the Ministry of War in this regard." Jerome Bonaparte gave the order again. Troche also readily accepted Jerome Bonaparte's orders. "Lieutenant Colonel Leboeuf, you are in charge of the news of the Near East. I must know the strength of the troops we can mobilize once the war begins, and the supply problem that the Near East can carry. If you encounter any difficulties, you can report to the Find Me Soon," said Jerome Bonaparte, pointing at Leboeuf. "Yes." Leboeuf responded again, point in Leboeuf's heart. He has vaguely felt the president's emphasis on the Near East. Perhaps the previous two regions were just smoke bombs released by the president. Chapter 120, Coup Candidates and Messages from Rome. Everything you are doing now is fighting for the future of the entire France, and France will never forget what you have done. I believe that with your efforts, the military secretariat will become a reality." After explaining the task, Jerome Bonaparte stood up and saluted all the officers present with a solemn expression. The officers hurriedly returned the salute to Jerome Bonaparte. "I entrust you with the future of France," said Jerome Bonaparte in a heavy tone. "We will swear our allegiance to Mr. President." Under the leadership of Leboeuf, all the officers present, whether they were sincere or conformist, swore allegiance to Jerome Bonaparte, regardless of what they should be loyal to. The object is the Republic, not Jerome Bonaparte. Jerome Bonaparte smiled. He waved his hand and the officers retreated. "Lieutenant Colonel Troche, you stay here for a while. I have something I want to talk to you about," Jerome Bonaparte said immediately, looking at Troche about to leave the conference hall. Hearing Jerome Bonaparte's order, Troche stopped, with a slight surprise on his face. He didn't understand why the president wanted to stop him. There was a hint of envy in the eyes of the officers who were leaving around, and in their opinion, Troche might have good luck. "Yes, Mr. President." Troche nodded slightly, strode to the seat just now and sat down, waiting for Jerome Bonaparte point after else left. The door of the conference hall closed again. Only Jerome Bonaparte and Troche were left at the scene. Sitting in the seat, Troche swallowed subconsciously and looked nervously at the president, who was enough to decide his life and death. Jerome Bonaparte. Everyone saw Troche's nervousness. He stepped forward and patted Troche's shoulder. In a kindly soothing tone, "Mr. Troche, don't be nervous. I will leave you alone. Just wanted to ask you some questions. Speak." Mr. President, I will answer truthfully. Trosh hurriedly expressed his loyalty to Jerome Bonaparte. If there is no error in the records of the Ministry of War, you should be Brigadier General Saint Arnault's adjutant. Right? Jerome Bonaparte asked Troch unhurriedly. No, that's right. I was ordered to be Brigadier General Saint Arnault's adjutant. Troch answered Jerome Bonaparte's question cautiously. Before determining the president's attitude towards his old boss, Troch could only respond carefully. What a slick. Jerome Bonaparte laughed and cursed in his heart. How could he not hear that Troch was putting himself in a position where he could advance and retreat freely, and the word ordered represented the official attitude of the province of Constantinople, the colonial province of Algeria, such as George Romeo. If Bonaparte was not happy with Saint Arnault, he could have left everything to official appointments. What kind of person do you think Brigadier General Saint Arnault is? Jerome Bonaparte continued to ask Saint Arnault. In order not to leave a lingering impression in front of Jerome Bonaparte, Troch cautiously praised his former boss, Brigadier General Saint Arnault, as a dedicated and loyal officer. During my time in Algiers, second have received a lot of care from him. Not just me, but many people in the army he led, have been taken care of by the Brigadier General. Even I was able to come here, and he managed it. It seems that General Saint Arnault is still a good general who knows and understands soldiers well. I really hope to have the opportunity to have an interview with him. Jerome Bonaparte nodded with satisfaction. The general who historically assisted his coup was reassigned to Paris. Jerome Bonaparte's affirmation gave Troch more motivation. He promoted his old boss more vigorously. He had just been promoted in a short period of time. There are so many battles, but as long as one's old boss can be promoted, then he doesn't have to worry about being promoted. The general once told me that the world he regretted most in his life was not joining the emperor's army in time. He often told us something related to the empire. He also has great respect for you, Your Excellency President. Then he touted his old superior. Yeah, I see. Jerome Bonaparte nodded and replied to Troch point immediately. He politely asked Troch to leave point. Troch got up and saluted Jerome Bonaparte again before leaving the conference hall. Point not long after, Jerome Bonaparte also left the conference hall and left the military secretary hall in the presence of everyone's attention. Point Jerome Bonaparte, who returned to the Elysee Palace, happened to meet Colonel Conrobert, who had returned from the War Department. He became a bridge between the president and the War Department, and he was also a rising upstart at the Elysee Palace. Let's go. Jerome Bonaparte entered the study with Conrobert. Point in the study, Conrobert reported to Jerome Bonaparte the main content of the meeting of the Ministry of War. Okay. I didn't read General Riegno wrong. He was able to surround Rome in such a short period of time. Jerome Bonaparte applauded. Point on April 28, 1849, under the secret instructions of Jerome Bonaparte and the Party of Order, the Minister of War Iuli signed the order to march into the Roman Republic. Point the already prepared 20,000 Alpine Front Army, led by Major General Riegno, commander of the Expeditionary Force, smashed to Civitavecchia in the name of protecting the Roman Republic. Point the 20,000 strong expeditionary force landed in Civitavecchia on May 7th with the cooperation of the French Navy. The port of Civitavecchia, which had not yet reacted, fell in an instant. The city, the council was dissolved, and the priests reoccupied the mainstream. From the 7th to the 10th, General Renaud continued to advance steadily, and a heavy artillery was transported by the navy to the port of Civitavecchia. When it was less than 3 kilometers away from the city of Rome, Mazzini, the ruler of the Roman Republic, realized that the French Republic was not here to help them. Riyadh1.com He quickly transferred the National Guard to attack the 20,000 French troops. The army of more than 8,000 people was defeated in less than one round, and the undertrained Roman National Guard just wanted to stop the regular army of the French Republic with enthusiasm. It is simply unrealistic. Point on May 16th, the French army set up camp in the countryside outside the city of Rome. He wanted to gradually eliminate the remnants of the Roman Republic, and then attack the inner city, to destroy the Roman Republic in one fell swoop. Just like killing those Berbers in Algiers. P.S. There are some errors between the information Jerome Bonaparte got from Conrobert and the actual actions of General Renaud in Rome. Persony, help me draft a letter. The content of the letter is as follows. Jerome Bonaparte said to Persigny, who had just stepped into the study. Persigny listened intently to Jerome Bonaparte's dictation. Jerome Bonaparte, who had finished his dictation, ordered Persigny to deliver the letter to General Canio, who was far away in Rome, as soon as possible. Chapter 121, Expedition. On June 1, 1849, the outskirts of Rome, the capital of the Papal State/Roman Republic. The outskirts of Rome, which had been shrouded in heavy rain overnight, exuded a stench and a musty smell. This is the 14th day after the siege of the city of Rome. Since May 17th, the Bandit Army of the French Republic, a derogatory term for the French Republic by the volunteers of the Roman Republic, occupied the suburbs and villages of the city of Rome, and the war has revolved around the suburbs of Rome. Riegno, the commander-in-chief of the Roman Expeditionary Force, who led more than 14,000 French soldiers, moved steadily and relied on the Navy's strong transportation capacity to transfer nearly 20 heavy artillery pieces. The purpose of coming to Rome was to protect the Roman Republic. Of course, the ruling Roman Republic headed by Mazzini was unwilling to believe Renaud's words after all. On the 16th, Renaud severely damaged their painstakingly running the National Guard in a rural area near Rome. How could there be such a person who declared to protect the other side and also severely damaged the other side's army? Although Mazzini was reluctant to believe Renaud's nonsense, the French soldiers were already in the city, and the army of the Republic was in urgent need of rectification. Mazzini had no choice but to deal with Reynolds while he reorganized the army and wrote to his French comrades, hoping that they could stop the army's invasion of the Republic. The Republic cannot fight the Republic. This is Mazzini's appeal. Of course, this is also the subjective factor that Mazzini subconsciously believed that the Roman Republic army was inferior to the French army. As for Riegno, he also understands Mazzini's intentions, and now he also needs time to transfer some of the teams stranded in Civitavecchia. In the first round of competition for the suburbs of Rome, Renaud found that his more than 14,000 advanced troops could not completely eliminate the Roman Republic, and he had to call all the remaining teams in Civitavecchia. Just come. On May 28th, the envelope of Jerome Bonaparte was delivered to General Renaud. General Renaud, who was well prepared, decided to follow the president's orders and fight a beautiful annihilation. On the evening of May 28th, with the order of General Renaud, the French war machine, which had rested for more than 10 days, started again. A cannon with solid shells set up the artillery overnight and was completely constructed around 3 in the morning. During this period, the Roman Republic also discovered Renaud's actions. Under the leadership of Garibaldi, the only remaining commander of the Roman Republic, they formed a death squad in an attempt to break into the artillery array and destroy the cannons. This action was blocked by the French army, and the two sides fought in the suburban streets, blood spattering on the streets and walls. Originally, the pair did not know each other, and even said that there was no deep hatred between the two parties, but under the guidance of the government, they became life and death opponents. The French army, the owner of Continental First, quickly forced the army of the Roman Republic to several strategic points inherent in them. With the order of General Renaud, all the guns were pointed at several strategic points and city walls in the city of Rome. A loud roar of cannons woke the inhabitants of the Roman Republic. The first round of uncalibrated cannons were fired, and some solid shells that veered off course just happened over the inner city walls and hit their apartments. The cannon that carried the huge impact slammed into the room's owner's side before he could react. The room owner, who only had the thought of "where am I? Who am I?" was instantly smashed to pieces by the solid shell, leaving only that there was a cloud of blood mist and a blur of blood-red flesh on the wall. Such a situation was common in Rome on the night of the 28th. Under the salvo of nearly 20 cannons, let alone them, even Mazzini, the ruler of the Roman Republic, almost died. Mazzini, who was on the wall of the Roman Republic, ordered the soldiers on the wall to counterattack. The soldiers on the wall could only respond hesitantly. Their artillery and range simply could not overwhelm the French Republic. It is better to preserve their strength than to fire at them now. Waiting for the French Republic to approach before attacking. Mazzini had to give up his plan to counterattack, and the cannon firing took nearly an hour to stop. At this time, the city of Rome looked like a goddess with a slashed face, leaving only ruins and mourning from time to time. They will definitely pay for it. Mazzini's expression was full of resentment, looking at Rome, which was already full of ruins. Perhaps God did not want to see the Roman Republic perish so quickly. In the early morning of May 29th, under the raid of the French Republic soldiers, the Roman Republic's outpost defense key points of Villa Corni, Villa Pamphili, and the barricades near Mount Ianiculum were lost. On the evening of the 29th, the artillery formation was moved to Mount Ianiculum under the order of Rienzo. Anyone with a little military knowledge knew that General Rienzo was about to launch a general attack on the Roman Republic. Just as General Rienzo was about to continue his offensive to defeat the suburbs and enter the inner city in one fell swoop, a large cloud of dark clouds appeared over Rome, shrouding the suburbs of Rome in rain, with lightning and rumbling thunder haunting the clouds. Judging from the thickness of the clouds, a heavy rain is inevitable, and rainy days are obviously not conducive to launching the general attack. Rienzo could only give up the attack on the city of Rome, and ordered the cannon to be taken care of. The rain fell for nearly 2 days, and it finally cleared up on the night of June 1st. The late night with a bright moon hanging in the sky was particularly deserted, and the storm from France was launched in the deserted point at 8 o'clock in the evening on June 1st. General Rienzo issued an order to the expeditionary force to march into the city of Rome. The cannons in the artillery array were activated again, and this time their premier yield was not the inner city of Rome, but the city walls surrounding the city of Rome. More than 40 cannons loaded with solid shells fired simultaneously towards the city walls. After a volley, the Roman walls were quickly blown out once breached. Edgarni, the commander of the raiding force, pulled out the command knife in his hand and shouted, "Enter Rome and hang Mazzini." The sharp and cold command knife flickered under the moonlight, making people feel a chill pouring into my heart. Seeing this, the surrounding commanders also raised the command knife in their hands and shouted diligently, "Enter the city of Rome and hang Mazzini." Thousands of soldiers armed with MTL 1842 breech guns, under the leadership of their respective commanders, formed a confrontation and rushed towards the gap like locusts in the city of Rome. The National Guard and the Volunteer Army, dressed in all kinds of troops and armed with made-in-all-countries rifles, gathered at the gap under the leadership of Garibaldi. Garibaldi is giving his final mobilization speech. "Soldiers, you are fighting for the Republic. Fighting for the millions of Italians. France has betrayed their faith, and their army has fallen into an army full of gangsters and ambitionists. I see in you the vigor of the new army. Although our weapons are not as good as this, I believe that the degenerate bandit army cannot fight against an army with only ideals and vigor. Their defeat is inevitable, and I will take the lead in this battle with you." After the speech, Garibaldi clenched his fists and shouted loudly, "Long live Italy, long live the Roman Republic." The National Guard and volunteers present were a group of energetic troops, eager to give their all to the unification of Italy. Encouraged by Garibaldi, they also shouted, "Long live Italy, long live the Roman Republic. Down with the French bandit army." This loud voice seemed to contain a power that could shake the earth, and it passed through the Roman city wall and reached the ears of the French army. There was a small wave of riots in the French army on the march, and some new recruits could not help but doubt the justice of the war. However, under the kind leather shoes of the veterans and the commander's knife, they didn't dare to think about attacking the gap. General Rienzo, who used the artillery array as a command post, frowned slightly. He pointed to the gap and gave an order to the artillery commander beside him. "All the cannons are fired at that. I want to see them. How to defeat our army." "Yes." The regiment commander in charge of the artillery formation quickly acted. Another salvo, this time with shotgun shells instead of solid shells. The shotgun that entered the inner city through the gap exploded at the moment of landing, and the countless shrapnel hidden in the shotgun shot out in all directions. "Be careful." The soldier beside Garibaldi instantly threw Garibaldi to the ground. "What?" Garibaldi, whose body was close to the ground, could only hear countless waiting sounds coming from his ears. Garibaldi, who reacted, wanted to get the soldiers up, and he wanted to continue the war. It was only then that he realized that the soldier who had jumped on him had died. The blood merged with the soldier's red uniform, and a grieving Garibaldi gently pushed the dead soldier away and got up again. The sharp-edged soldiers who fought against the French vanguard suffered heavy casualties from Rienzo's artillery. These were all the teams he brought out by himself. Some of them also followed him to fight the Austrians in Lombardy. Those who survived at the hands of the feudal monarchy died at the hands of their compatriots who were also republics. Thinking of this, Garibaldi's heart is like dripping blood. Hang. Mazzini, a hoarse cry pulled Garibaldi out of his grief and anger. Garibaldi, who adjusted his mentality, wanted to gather the remaining team to block the French troops. General, let's go. We can stop them. The blood-stained adjutant grabbed Garibaldi's arm and shouted hard. Garibaldi glanced at the remaining soldiers beside him. He knew that, even if he fought to the death here, he would block the French soldiers more and more. Riyadh1.com. He could only gradually retreat to the inner city. Relying on the streets and roam the inhabitants of the city were the most effective way to fight against France. Even though Garibaldi's heart is full of unwillingness, it can only be turned into a powerless sigh at the moment. Withdraw. Under Garibaldi's orders, the remaining Roman Republic army had to give up blocking the gap. The French army, like the tide, occupied the gap under the leadership of Edgarni. Tell the commander that we have opened the road to the inner city and we need further instructions. Edgarni wiped the sweat from his forehead and ordered the soldier beside him. Yes, the soldiers who received the order of Edgarni quickly set off for General Renault. Chapter 122, Flattery of the Holy See. Report to the commander. Our army has occupied the passage to the inner city and ask for the next step. The soldier in charge of conveying the order came to the front of Major General Rienio and saluted him and said, tell Major Edgarni and order him to control the city gates to receive the troops into Rome. After giving the next order to the messenger, General Renault yawned and said to the artillery commander next to him, if Major Edgarni reports again, tell him to rest. He should know my place. Yes. The artillery regiment responded quickly. General Renault turned to leave, and he suddenly thought of something before he took a few steps, and he turned to face the artillery commander again. Commander. The artillery commander was stunned for a moment and stared at Renault with puzzled eyes. Where is the map? General Renault ordered the artillery commander again. The artillery commander hurriedly brought the map in front of General Renault and ordered the soldiers beside him to bring a kerosene lamp for General Renault to illuminate. Under the light of the kerosene lamp, Renault would use his rough hand to draw the map of Rome. Frowning, he stopped his hand on a place marked by some gates and asked, can you tell me this place where? The artillery commander was stunned for a moment, carefully checked the position where General Renault pointed his finger, and then looked at the city of Rome with the help of the moonlight. Rome did not seem to have the door that General Renault pointed to. See, Commander, this may be because of the age. The artillery commander carefully tried to explain, this map is actually left over from the Emperor's time. The Emperor's era has been more than 30 years away from us. The change is also as it should be. Should you call this ought? General Rienio raised his voice and criticized sternly, your sentence ought may ruin the lives of many people. The artillery regiment commander lowered his eyebrows and did not dare to refute point since the Emperor's abdication. The French army has not changed much, and even the basic intelligence work of the army is a mess. If this continues, the entire French army will face a crisis. Of course, in General Rienio's mind, this was just a small crisis for the French army, far from the danger of destroying the army. All it takes is a little beating on them. Let Major Edgarni, Brigadier General Neil, complete the order and come to my residence later. General Rienio said to the artillery commander, and he was going to command all the middle and higher level commanders in this expedition. All the officers were called over, and he wanted to rectify the freedom of the French army. Yes. The artillery regiment commander, General Rienio, who did not dare to offend, responded in a low voice. A line, here, and here, give me a hard bang. Rienio pointed to the city hall on the map and the surrounding landmark buildings, and said to the artillery commander, give me a go. Get rid of their arrogance. After explaining all the situation, Rienio slowly descended the mountain under the protection of the soldiers, leaving only the artillery commander who obeyed General Rienio's orders. June 2, 1849. After a night of scuffles, the French army finally occupied the Roman city walls just before the sun reached the horizon, and Rome was exposed as a possession of France. The Roman Republic is dead. As the ruling Roman Republic, Mazzini escaped from Rome. There were only about 5,000 soldiers scattered in the streets of Rome under the leadership of Garibaldi. They were going to make this place another Austria, draining the French army every drop of blood. Of course, France would not do as they wish. The artillery on Mount Janiculum and the cannons on the Roman city wall had already been aimed at the city of Rome. Once there was movement in the streets of the city of Rome, the cannons would shoot the streets. As soon as possible, the soldiers who had been tired all night began to rest one after another under the orders of the merciful commanders. The commander, who had also fought all night, was told by the artillery commander to go to General Renault's residence. Before he had time to make repairs, the puzzled commanders could only forget their exhaustion for a while and head to General Rienio's temporary residence. More than a dozen military commanders came to an apartment on the outskirts of Rome, passed through a unique garden, and faced the rising sun to the door of the apartment. This apartment was originally a wealthy nobleman from Rome. After the establishment of the Roman Republic, the nobles fled in a hurry, and the apartment became an ownerless thing. After the French army was stationed on the outskirts of Rome, the apartment became a French thing. The commander just fell asleep. You wait. The soldier in charge of guarding the gate said to the commander. After the commanders looked at each other, they could only wait at the gate of the apartment. After about half an hour, the door of the apartment slowly opened, and General Renault in the uniform of the First Empire appeared at the door. Everyone, except Edgarni, showed surprised expressions. Come in. Rienio waved to everyone. Edgarni and the others entered the hall. The artworks in the hall had long since disappeared, leaving only a long table of walnut wood. On the long table is a simple sand table, and next to the sand table is a slightly yellowed map. You guys, great job. General Rienio gave a thumbs up to everyone present. For the Empire. Edgarni, who was excited, responded first. For the Empire. The remaining commanders also shouted loudly. After all, in an army that works from top to bottom, the commander is a Bonapartist. How could they not move closer to the commander? The next action is crucial, which is directly related to their wallet. If that Bonaparte could lead them to the same wealth as the emperor, they certainly wouldn't mind giving the president a center. When everyone came to the front of the map, General Renault started a frenzy of dividing up. Brigadier General Neil, your next task is. Neil, who was second only to General Rienio in the expeditionary force, won the beautiful job around the city hall, so that his peers cast him envious look. Colonel Di Lassimo, your mission is to eliminate the traitors in this area. Rienio once again circled an area and handed it over to Colonel Di Lassimus. Colonel Di Lassimus, who was second only to Colonel Neil, also smiled. General Renault arranged for everyone present to clear the area of gangsters in turn, and then said solemnly, everyone, I wish you all success. Long live the president, long live the empire. The satisfied officers cheered sincerely. Rienio nodded with satisfaction. The effect of this expedition obviously exceeded his expectations. It appears that the military's resistance to the president is not strong. After the division was completed, General Renault informed every officer present about the map, and the officer's face showed a little shame. After beating the officers, General Renault then warned, I don't want to see situations where the labels in the pictures do not conform to reality in the future. Now I want to give you a task, to give every street in the area you are responsible for. I marked it out on the map, and put it together. Yes, the officers said in unison, let's take a rest first. By the way, Brigadier General Neil is staying. Renault said kindly to all the commanders. The commanding staff took orders to leave, and Brigadier General Neil was briefly confused for a few seconds, and then stood up straight, and obeyed General Renault's orders. Neil, sit down. General Renault, who was sitting beside the map, warmly invited Neil to sit down. Yes. Neil sat next to General Renault. Look, here, and here, said General Rienio, pointing out several buildings to Neil. These buildings were not there when I looked down at Rome from the heights of Mount Janiculum. See? Brigadier General Neil instantly understood what General Renault meant. General, do you want me to recheck the map of the suburbs of Rome? That's right. Rienio nodded and said to Neil, you are the Paris Engineering School, and I will let them, the officers, put together the streets and buildings in the area they are in charge of, and hand them over to you. You and your subordinates make a new map. We can't fight here with maps from decades ago, otherwise there will be trouble. Yes. Brigadier General Neil immediately took over the task of Major General Riegno. When he was at the Paris Institute of Engineering, he was a surveyor. If it weren't for some unexpected circumstances, he might have become the national engineer of the road and bridge troops. Then, take your troubles, General Renio said to Brigadier General Neil. After Brigadier General Neil left, Renio continued to stare at the map, and an absurd thought poured out of his mind. Perhaps I should suggest to His Majesty that all maps should be remade. General Renio did not know that what he was thinking about had already been carried out in an orderly manner in Jerome Bonaparte. The time gradually came to 6 o'clock in the afternoon. The fiery red disk was slowly falling, and the French army, which had been repaired during the day, was reborn. They were gearing up to go deep into the Roman bloc and completely destroy Garibaldi's troops. On the other hand, www.riyadh1.com General Rieno's apartment also welcomed an uninvited guest. A sullen middle-aged man with a naturally curly face with a Chinese character in mind came to General Renault's villa in black tights and trousers, and said to General Renault with a pious expression, "God bless, General, you defeated the mob, protected God. Bishop Antonelli, I'm just following the order of Your Excellency the President." General Renault said in a humble voice to the big man Cardinal Antonelli next to Pius IX in front of him. Antonelli, who was only 42 years old, gradually showed a kind smile and nodded and said, "Of course. Of course. Mr. President is really a pious person. I heard that he came to Rome as early as a year ago." Immediately, he showed a regretful expression, "But I was still visiting Naples at the time, and I didn't have the chance to visit Mr. President." General Riegno did not speak, and waited quietly for Antonelli's performance. "General Riegno, when will His Majesty the Pope be able to enter Rome? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels." Chapter 123, Annihilate Garibaldi. Bishop Antonelli. General Renault's eyes stared straight at Antonelli. Those dark blue eyes like gems seemed to be able to clearly see all the filth deep in Antonelli's heart. The breath even frightened the minister beside the Pope to back several steps. How could Antonelli, who was pampered in Rome and respected by the monarchs of various countries during his visits, had seen such a posture? He said to General Renault with a trembling voice, General, am I right?" General Renault continued to stare at Antonelli with his sharp eyes and said slowly, "Mr. Antonelli, don't you think a brief thank you is too cheap?" Antonelli was speechless with his mouth open. He understood General Renault's subtext. What a greedy guy. Antonelli couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. Right now is the time when French soldiers are needed to restore Rome for them. The only thing they can count on is the French Republic. P.S. During the talks between France, Spain, Naples, and Austria on the issue of the Papal State, Austrian diplomats obeyed the order of the new Austrian Foreign Minister and Prime Minister Prince Schwarzenberg to refuse to provide assistance to the Papal State, and will restore the Papal State to the Papal State. The task of France, in order to hold France back. The two countries, Naples and Spain, can only sway with the Austrian Empire because of their own lack of strength. All Pius IX could rely on was the French Republic. Cheap gratitude is certainly not enough to express His Majesty the Pope's gratitude to President Napoleon. Antonelli showed a flattering smile, his body hunched slightly. "His Majesty the Pope told me that once he returns to Rome, he will continue in Rome. Spread the good news of God." Then, he said cautiously, "I personally think that Mr. President should not be satisfied with the position of the President. I believe that with God's blessing, Mr. President will be further promoted." General Renault, who had received the promise of Pope Pius IX, showed a smile on his tense expression, and his eyes, that were as uncomfortable as beasts, gradually changed into those of the grandfather next door. Antonelli breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that General Renault basically agreed with the return plan he proposed. At this point, Antonelli couldn't help but strengthen his courage and said, "Your Majesty's faithful hope that Bonaparte can return to their original position, and we also sincerely wish Bonaparte to be able to protect France from generation to generation." The Papal State, which once had some great hatred with the Bonaparte Empire, has become a Confederate army of the Papal States today. This undoubtedly shows that the Papal State can cooperate with any country, as long as they can ensure that their power is not violated in central Italy. Compared with the Papal State, which can hop freely in the diplomatic field, the Austrian Empire, based on conservative diplomacy, is more like a religious country, full of rich flavor, and the master of this country, Joseph Franz, is even more of a Pope Pius IX, the more conservative guy. At least Pius IX had to implement conservative policies for his own power, and Joseph Franz himself was consistently conservative. I believe that Mr. President will be happy. Renault nodded with satisfaction, and added, if Mr. President is happy, we will be happy too. Yes. Yes. Antonelli nodded and bowed to General Renault. At this moment, Edgani ran in, and as the adjutant of General Riegno, he reported to Riegno, Commander, we have received news that the first group of Garibaldi will be here today. Break through to St. John's Gate in the evening. Before General Riegno could respond, Bishop Antonelli, who was standing beside him, blurted out, they must not be allowed to break through. Bishop Antonelli, who was familiar with the situation in the Roman Republic, certainly knew of Garibaldi's great deeds. If this person is allowed to escape, there will be no peace in the Papal Kingdom. In fact, Antonelli still hopes to establish an armed force that has always belonged to the Pope. The French army only needs to help the Papal State to restore the country. Antonelli's words caught the eyes of General Renault and Edgani. After nearly a month of running in, Edgani and Rienho have already reached the skill that they can understand each other's thoughts only with eye hints. General Rienho's eyes signaled Edgani to leave go. After Edgani saluted Renault, he left Antonelli alone without taking Antonelli seriously. Respected Commander. Antonelli looked anxiously at General Renault, and his words became more respectful. Don't worry, Bishop Antonelli, my soldiers and I will definitely keep Garibaldi here. After all, General Renault stomped his feet with his heels and emphasized, here, referring to the inner city of Rome, will be his burial place. But, in case, Antonelli said unwillingly, don't worry, Your Excellency, I will personally supervise this battle. General Renault assured Antonelli again, how about you go to the battlefield with me and witness how the French soldiers killed Garibaldi. Antonelli was a little moved. However, Riegno's next words dispelled Antonelli's thoughts. I'm afraid that bullets won't have long eyes on the battlefield. In the event that Your Excellency Bishop unfortunately sacrifices, Rienho shook his head and sighed, as if Antonelli's fate was doomed to die on the battlefield. The courageous Antonelli shrank back in an instant. The city of Rome is now full of rebels who hate Bonaparte's loyal lackeys, and even more Antonelli's lackeys who follow the Pope. The notorious Antonelli dared not put his safety on the French army. I'll forget it. Antonelli squeezed a smile on his face and said humbly, I will wait for the news of the general's victory in Civitavecchia. After all, Antonelli turned and left. General Renault, who watched Antonelli leave, had a look of disdain on his face. After saying goodbye to Antonelli, General Renault rushed to the battlefield and turned with Edgani at the French front. It was already 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and the afterglow of the setting sun swayed every light of it, just like the Roman Republic that is about to come to an end. The French army that cleared the inner and outer ring of Rome was gradually approaching the east side of Rome, and they were trying to eat Garibaldi's entire team in Rome. Commander Edgani, who was holding a command knife and ordered the soldiers to charge, looked at General Renault who was on the horse, and he hurried to General Renault and said anxiously, Commander, the situation is urgent now. Garibaldi the hunter, sniper, is secretly shooting our black guns. You better dismount. Major Edgar. General Renault, who was riding on the horse, didn't seem to hear Edgani's dissuasion. In his opinion, if he dismounted himself, it would mean that he was afraid of the Garibaldi chasseurs. This invisibly gave the French army a blow. Call Brigadier General Neil over here. Yes. Edgani, who saw that General Renault refused to dismount, had to order several cavalry soldiers to surround General Renault to protect the general, and he acted as a messenger for Ney near the Quilina Palace. Brigadier General L comes. Spyglass. Renault, who was riding on a horse, stretched out his hand and said to the cavalry beside him, "Point." The cavalry handed his binoculars to General Reno, and General Reno, holding the binoculars, saw the troop gathered around a few abandoned villas in the distance. This team of nearly 1,000 people rushed to the positions they had abandoned with heavy artillery, and they wanted to regain the positions they had lost. The French commander in charge of guarding the position is also a guy who is not afraid of death. The two sides are fighting in the ruins that have been smashed. That's right. Reinho nodded with satisfaction. The French soldiers were already using their actions to prove that they were always brave and good at fighting. Not long after, Brigadier General Neil and Edgarny came to General Reno, and the two of them saluted General Reno respectively. Brigadier General Neil, let your troops quickly shrink the encirclement and compress the encirclement from Lallange Church to the vicinity of St. John's Gate. General Riegno gave an order to Brigadier General Neil. Brigadier General Neil showed a surprised expression. He learned from Edgarny that Garibaldi was about to break out of the St. John's Gate. He wondered why General Riegno would follow Garibaldi's wish. However, as General Reno's subordinate, he only had to obey orders. When Brigadier General Neil was gone, the French troops in the distant villas were also victorious, with reinforcement. General Reno looked at Edgarny and asked, "Major Edgar, how did you know that Garibaldi even broke through the St. John's Gate?" This. Edgarny hesitated for a moment and then said to General Reno, "General, come with me." General Reno and Edgarny, who were riding on horses, came to a palace that had not yet turned into ruins, where they met a young missionary. Edgarny introduced the two young monks' identity to General Reno. General Reno quickly and respectfully addressed the monk as His Royal Highness. This is Louis Napoleon, the nephew of Jerome Bonaparte. General, this is what I learned from my father. I hope it can help you. Louis Napoleon said to General Reno, "Is Prince Carnot in the house?" General Riegno asked cautiously, "My father has no interest in politics, so." Louis Napoleon showed an apologetic expression. Then, we won't disturb Prince Carnot. Chapter 124, Occupy Rome. General Riegno left the palace of Bonaparte with Major Edgarny. In order to prevent the Prince Carnot living in the palace of Bonaparte from being unnecessarily disturbed, General Renault specially sent a team around the palace of Bonaparte to protect the security of the palace of Bonaparte and Prince Carnot. Since it was the information from Prince Carnot, then of course General Reno chose to believe it without hesitation. After thinking about it for a long time, General Reno on the horse turned to look at Edgarny, who was also riding beside him, and said, "Did you know the news of Prince Carnot early on?" Edgarny shook his head with a wry smile and said, "If I knew that Prince Carnot was in the city, why wouldn't I stop you from firing at the city?" Edgarny looked back at the palace of Bonaparte under the setting sun with a lingering fear, and said in a low voice, "This is the residence of the Empress Dowager, 2 generations of Prince Carnot. Have you ever lived here?" After listening to Edgarny's remarks, a strong-willed person like General Reno couldn't help but feel a chill, and his body shivered. Fortunately, Piazza Venezia did not become the target of artillery bombardment when bombarding Rome. Otherwise, General Reno really does not know how to explain the Bonaparte Palace to His Excellency the President. With this in mind, General Reno made up his mind to drive Garibaldi and the others out of the inner city. If the trouble continues, there may be a big mess. Pass my order, and the troops will shrink immediately. We must force Garibaldi to break through the gate of St. John. General Riegno solemnly gave the order. Yes. Edgarny, who received the order, quickly moved his horse to convey General Reno's order. Just when General Riegno was determined to completely expel Garibaldi from the inner city of Rome, Prince Carnot and his son Lucien in the palace of Bonaparte were about to have a heart-to-heart relationship between father and son. At this moment, Charles Bonaparte, Prince of Connaught, was standing by the window, gazing at the gradually falling sunset. Dang. Dang dang, the crisp and rhythmic knock on the door reached Prince Carnot, who said flatly, "Come in." The door of the study opened slowly, and Lucien entered the study. "Are they gone?" Prince Carnot, who turned his back to Lucien, said in a flat tone. "Let's go." Lucien responded, adding, "Now the French army has occupied the entire inner city." "Yeah." Prince Carnot sighed with emotion. He turned around and patted Lucien's shoulder and said in a kind tone, "You have to go on your own for the future." Prince Carnot's words made Lucien stunned. He didn't understand what his father meant. "Father, what I said is that the army of the French Republic has occupied the whole of Rome." "I know." Prince Carnot nodded in response. "Then, why are you leaving?" Lucien asked in confusion. "They came to Rome on the orders of Uncle Jerome. Even if you joined the Roman Republic, they would not expel you." "Alas." Prince Carnot sighed and sighed. "The French army may not expel me, but the Pope, his and the nobles who have fled from Rome will definitely not let me go. After the Pope is reset, he may not embarrass me in the face of your uncle, but they will definitely expel Bishop me. By that time, not only will I be exiled, but even you may be at risk of being exiled. Then let's go together." Lucien said to Prince Carnot, "Let's leave Rome together. Britain, France, and America can go anywhere." "No." Prince Carnot said to Lucien sternly, "I will leave Rome with your mother, and you will continue to stay in Rome alone. As long as I leave, the Pope and the others will not only embarrass you, but also for the sake of your uncle, you get promoted fast. Haven't you always dreamed of being a cardinal like your great uncle and grandfather?" Lucien, who always wanted to escape from his father on weekdays, really did not want to be separated from his parents. When he was separated, he stuck his neck and said, "I don't care. I will be with you." "What a bastard." Prince Carnot blew his beard and stared and said in a more stern tone, "What exactly did I do this for? It's not for the future of you and your brother. You're doing this just for yourself." Lucien retorted loudly, "You could have avoided it, but you still went in without hesitation." Lucien's words were like a sharp knife, peeling off Prince Carnot's firm exterior, revealing his unwilling heart. After the news of Jerome Bonaparte as the president of the French Republic spread to Rome through France, Prince Carnot's ambition was also awakened with the success of Jerome Bonaparte. Activated by the desire for politics and the blood of Bonaparte, Prince Carnot began to make waves in this papal state without a pope. The success of Jerome Bonaparte led him to blindly believe that he too must be able to achieve fame like his cousin. At that time, his cousin will be the president of the French Republic, and he will also become the president of the Roman Republic and even the Italian Republic. Every time he thinks of this, Prince Carnot can't stop being excited. Under the special promotion of Prince Carnot, his popularity gradually increased. There were even rumors that Prince Carnot should be in power in some areas of Rome. The dream of becoming the ruler of Rome lasted from December to January, until the arrival of Mazzini and others completely shattered Prince Carnot's dream. The Roman Republic was established, and the ruling trio headed by Mazzini was established. In order to appease the emotions of Prince Carnot, and also to take care of the relationship between the Roman Republic and the French Republic, Mazzini handed over the position of Minister of Education to Prince Carnot. The huge gap in the heart made Prince Carnot unhappy all day long. The Ministry of Education could not see Prince Carnot at all, and Mazzini gradually forgot Prince Carnot. It was not until France landed in the port of Civitavecchia and appeared on the outskirts of the Roman Republic that he remembered Prince Carnot. He hurriedly invited Prince Carnot over and asked him to write to Jerome Bonaparte, hoping that France with the Republic and the Roman Republic can join hands to fight for the cause of national liberation. Looking at the passionate Mazzini, Prince Carnot was even more convinced that the guy in front of him was just a godstick in the uniform of Italy, and he immediately resigned to Mazzini. After a few seconds of silence, Mazzini agreed to Prince Carnot's resignation. Prince Carnot, who had withdrawn from the Roman Republic, returned to the palace of Bonaparte until the French Republic entered the inner city. I'm an irresponsible father," Prince Carnot said in a low tone. "I do my duty as a father." "No. Father, you have paved a path for my brother and me." Lucien comforted Prince Carnot. "My brother will inherit the title of Prince Carnot, and I will become the Cardinal of Rome. Such an arrangement, it's enough." "Really?" Prince Carnot raised his head with a hint of earnestness in his eyes, hoping to be recognized. "Yeah." Lucien nodded and responded, "Our whole life has been envied by many people, and all of this is due to your credit, Prince." Carnot showed a wry smile. Of course he understood that this was Lucien's comfort, and his so-called credit was just an embellishment under Bonaparte's halo. As night fell, a round of bright moonlight and stars dotted the dark sky. Under the clear water-like moonlight, a small team wearing red cedars and tall hats decorated with black feathers quietly walked through the streets of the inner city of Rome. They were Garibaldi's personal guard, and the bearded middle-aged man at the front of the team was Garibaldi. The detachment arrived at the Church of St. Lateran, where it was gathered, without encountering any attack. Garibaldi took out his pocket watch and waited for the arrival of the scheduled time. The veterans with muskets in the squad watched the surrounding movements vigilantly for fear of a sudden attack. The recruits who had only experienced one or two battles and had not yet left their childish hands trembled and kept swallowing their own saliva to connect to the depths of their hearts of tension. As time passed, more than 20 small teams arrived one after another, and Garibaldi's troops changed from more than 200 to a huge team of 4,000. The quiet environment made Garibaldi smell an unusual breath. Years of war have made Garibaldi develop a vigilant instinct for war. He frowned and thought carefully. The black wife standing beside him looked at Garibaldi puzzled and asked in Spanish, "What's wrong? Shouldn't we break through? I always feel that something is wrong there. Don't you think the current environment seems too quiet?" Garibaldi also responded in French. "It's a little quiet." The black wife nodded and urged, "But we are running out of time." Yes, time is running out for Garibaldi now. Now that he has come to the Lateran Church, it is absolutely impossible to continue to change the plan. To know that the French bandit army is in Rome, they must break out of the outer city to fight guerrillas with them as soon as possible. The original plan remains unchanged. Garibaldi ordered. The troops moved quickly, and it didn't take long for them to come to the vicinity of St. John's Gate. The team responsible for guarding the Port St. John received early notice from General Renaud that, after 2 encounters with Garibaldi's army, the French army was defeated. The hasty withdrawal of the French army once again aroused Garibaldi's alertness, but this alertness was soon interrupted by the urging of his wife. "Quick, go." Garibaldi rushed out of the inner city to the periphery. "As long as you get here, everything will be fine." Garibaldi, who rushed out of the inner city, showed a happy smile. However, Garibaldi's smile did not last long. A cannonball flew to the center of the team and exploded, followed by a murderous voice from the surrounding area, "Kill." Only then did Garibaldi understand that he might have jumped out of the encirclement carefully designed by the French army. Garibaldi, who had no time to think about who was betrayed, led the crowd to break through. In the face of the mighty French army, Garibaldi and his volunteers showed a goodwill to fight, but the newly established army was outnumbered and defeated in terms of combat skills, weapon level and force comparison. Riyadh1.com. The battle continued until about 3 o'clock in the morning. Ed Ghani, covered in enemy blood, reported to Reno. Report, Commander. This time we killed a total of 2,700 people, captured 1,000 people, and the rest 300 people broke through the siege and fled around. Our troops are pursuing. Where's Garibaldi? Has he been captured? General Reignaud asked Ed Ghani. Ed Ghani glanced around, and after confirming that there was no one else around, he whispered to General Renaud, "I have followed your instructions to open a way for Garibaldi. Can he escape successfully? It's up to him." General Renaud showed an approving look. For the French army that was about to be stationed in Rome for a long time, a living Garibaldi was more useful than a dead Garibaldi. In layman's terms, France's current behavior is called self-respect for pirates. And please write to Your Excellency immediately that we have occupied Rome. Chapter 125. New Conspiracy. Early morning on June 8, 1849. An envelope from Rome crossed the sea into the territory of France, and then via Marseille, Lyon, by the train to the military office of the Élysée Palace. Pessinny, who had received a letter from Rome early in the morning, hurried to the door of Jerome Bonaparte's bedroom. Now that the door was opened, Pessinny hesitated for a moment, but the sound of Jerome Bonaparte still rang. "Buzz door." As Pessinny knocked on the door louder and louder, Jerome Bonaparte in the bedroom finally opened his sleepy eyes and asked Pessinny lazily, "What's the matter, Your Majesty?" "There is a letter from Rome," Pessinny said calmly outside the door. "Rome?" Jerome Bonaparte muttered to himself in a half-dreaming state, and then woke up. After patting his cheeks lightly, he put on the clothes he had prepared the night before and opened the door. He stretched out his hand and said eagerly to Pessinny, "It's the letter." Here, Your Majesty. Pessinny respectfully handed over a letter from Rome to Jerome Bonaparte. The bland brown-yellow envelope was marked with the words initiated by the president in French, and the lower right corner of the envelope was signed Regno di Saint Jean Guerrier, Commander-in-Chief of the Roman Expeditionary Force. Jerome Bonaparte quickly opened the envelope, the white letter lying quietly in the envelope, took out the letter, and placed the empty envelope on the walnut bedside table, while he sat beside the bed, to check the contents of the letter. Opening the folded letter, Jerome Bonaparte was able to see the whole letter in its entirety. The contents of the envelope are as follows. Dear Mr. President, under your wise decision and leadership, our troops fought steadily and completely conquered the city of Rome on the night of June 3rd. In this battle, we annihilated more than 40,000 people in the Roman Republic, exaggerated, and captured more than 5,000 deheads. The members of the puppet government headed by Mazzini have also been captured by our army. The only regret is that we did not capture Garibaldi, the military commander of the puppet government. This cunning guy escaped our pursuit at a loss. Fighting each other, we fought the best fight since the empire, and it's all thanks to the next words are all a lot of compliments, such as, without the president's wise decision, we will not be able to defeat Rome. Jerome Bonaparte, who had read the letter from beginning to end, folded the letter and placed it on the bed. He could be sure that this letter could never have been written by General Reynolds himself. 9 times out of 10, it was Edgarni. Letter from this knife catcher in place of General Reno. However, Jerome Bonaparte is not disgusted by this kind of flattery. Your Majesty, over in Rome. Pessinny, who was standing beside Jerome Bonaparte, asked cautiously, didn't you see it? Jerome Bonaparte looked at Pessinny in confusion. Pessinny shook his head and replied unswervingly, this letter was written to you by Rome. How dare your subordinates dare to do it for you, then? Take a look too. Jerome Bonaparte handed the stationery on the bed to Pessinny. Pessinny took the letter with both hands respectfully and read it at a glance. After about 2 minutes, Pessinny refolded the letter and placed it on the bedside with a happy expression on his face. Your Majesty, Rome is victorious. That's right. Rome has won. Jerome Bonaparte breathed a sigh of relief, nodding with a smile on his face. Regno personally ordered to go to Rome to suppress the rebellion. It can be said that Regno represents the will and prestige of Jerome Bonaparte. Once Reno made a mistake in Rome, it would inevitably lead to the reduction of Jerome Bonaparte's prestige. Especially in the more than 10 days after May 17th. Jerome Bonaparte often remembered that the first attack on General Oudinot in history ended in failure, and he hoped that General Reno would prevent the failure and go straight to Huang Lang. After receiving the letter, Jerome Bonaparte let go of his dangling heart. Next, he should think about how to turn this war into his own advantage. Pessinny. Jerome Bonaparte conveyed an order to Pessinny, rush to the residences of Prime Minister Odilon Barrot and Minister Lelia as soon as possible, and call them both. Yes. Pessinny responded, turning to leave. Before Pessinny could step out of the bedroom, Jerome Bonaparte's voice came from behind Pessinny again. Wait a minute. Pessinny turned around again, staring at Jerome Bonaparte in confusion. How do you feel about setting up a telegraph line to Rome? Jerome Bonaparte asked Pessinny, raising his head. That's the best. Pessinny replied immediately, this saves a lot of time. Not only Rome, but the Near East also needs to set up a telegraph line. Well, you can also call the Minister of Agriculture and Commerce along the way. The work of setting up the telegraph has always been the responsibility of the Ministry of Agriculture and Commerce. Bonaparte waved his hand. Pessinny turned and left Jerome Bonaparte's bedroom. Jerome Bonaparte got up and restuffed the letter in the outer envelope and put it in his pocket. After washing up under the service of the housekeeper and the maid, after eating a simple breakfast worth 500 francs, he returned to the study alone to wait for the guests to arrive. At 9:10 am, Pessinny returned to the Élysée Palace to inform Jerome Bonaparte of 2 ministers and a prime minister. Your Majesty, Prime Minister Odilon Barrot and Minister Lelia will be here soon. Minister Buffy himself is inspecting the village near Paris, and it is estimated that he will be back in the afternoon. It seems that the Minister of Agriculture and Commerce is quite competent. Jerome Bonaparte joked half jokingly and half seriously. Your Majesty, I once heard that Minister Buffy owns a large piece of land in the Seine. Pessini responded to Jerome Bonaparte. Point, my dear, the feeling is to use the convenience of the job, to go to inspect the land. Jerome Bonaparte was a bit dumbfounded. The ministers under him didn't look like serious bureaucrats at all, but rather like businessmen with a lot of money. This is very capitalistic. Yes, I can. Has Minister Buffy illegally expropriated land? Jerome Bonaparte asked casually. After a moment of silence, Pessini said, Your Majesty, do you need me to call someone from the police department to check? No need for now. Jerome Bonaparte rejected Pessini's suggestion. We must first find out Biff's attitude. If he is unwilling to cooperate with us, we will carry out the next step. Yes. Pessini responded to Jerome Bonaparte. Your Excellency. Odilon Barrow's voice came from outside the door. Jerome Bonaparte gestured to Pessini with his eyes, and Pessini quickly moved away from Jerome Bonaparte and sat on the sofa beside him. Come in. Jerome Bonaparte responded. Rushing out the door, Odilon Barrow entered the study, followed by Minister Liuli. Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Minister, please take a seat. Jerome Bonaparte invited Barrow to sit down with Liuli. Pessini quickly got up to give up their seats to Barrow and Liuli, then smiled and nodded and left the study. Jerome Bonaparte got up and came to Barrow and Liuli and said to them, I have received a letter from Rome that General Riegno and Major Edgarni have led the army to occupy Rome. Odilon, Barrow and Liuli showed varying degrees of surprise. They did not expect the Roman Republic to be so vulnerable, and it took them less than half a month to defeat them. It's all thanks to your leadership, President. Liuli immediately boasted to Jerome Bonaparte. A trace of displeasure flashed in Odilon Barrow's eyes. Obviously he was the one who promoted him to this position, but he didn't feel grateful and wanted to be a joke. Barrow, who was happy to work with Jerome Bonaparte at the moment, nodded and seemed to agree with Liuli's words. Jerome Bonaparte waved his hand humbly and said, This is all looking at the joint efforts of Mr. Prime Minister and his colleagues from the Party of Order. I just follow the trend. Odilon Barrow was satisfied with the modesty of Jerome Bonaparte. A president who is modest, but does not interfere too much with the running of his cabinet is undoubtedly the favorite of any power-hungry prime minister. P.S. From Barrow's point of view, Jerome Bonaparte, who occasionally interferes with the army in a wild way, can't be regarded as interfering in the operation of the cabinet at all. In the constitution of the Second Republic, the Prime Minister did not have the power to command the army. The War Department was a stealth department for Barrow. Mr. Barrow, what should we do next? Those guys in the council will never let this big news go unnoticed. They are very likely to use this as a weapon to attack us. That guy Ludrow Roland is eager to. We made a mistake, said Jerome Bonaparte, feigned apprehension. Please, don't worry. Odilon Barrow said confidently. Riyadh1.com. He obviously had already figured out a strategy to deal with it. Those guys in the Mountain Party won't be happy for long when they launch a campaign against us again. At the time of the attack, when they were expelled from Parliament, General Changanier was ready. Changanier again. What a haunted guy. Jerome Bonaparte silently cursed the dying Changanier to see God earlier. The curse is a curse, but Jerome Bonaparte still had a gratified smile on his face and said, it would be great if General Changanier was willing to take action. Our plan is to. Odilon Barrow was discussing incessantly, but Liuli, who was sitting beside Barrow, looked a little sullen. As the Minister of War, he and the members of the Party of Order did not know Barrow's conspiracy, just like the President. Even Changanier, who was supposed to be a subordinate, had no respect for his titular boss. What was the meaning of this Minister of War? End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.